Chapter 2402. Fellow Taoist. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "How do you know me?" "Ha!" That disciple stood there with difficulty and returned the greeting. Zhang Xiaojiang participated in the Taiching sect's Feather Immortal Assembly with fellow Taoist Xiao. However, we were not in the same group and never met. Fellow Taoist Xiao fought Yun Jiechong in the assembly, which was also witnessed by me, so I have a deep impression of fellow Taoist Xiao. I see. Xiao Hua nodded, looked at Zhang Xiaojiang and said, "Since you are an old friend from the Feather Immortal Assembly, I naturally can't stand by and watch." As he spoke, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and Zhang Xiaojiang felt his meridians loosen, and his true essence began to flow again. "Oh, so fellow Taoist Xiao wasn't captured?" Zhang Xiaojiang was overjoyed. "When did I say I was captured?" Xiao Hua waved his hand, took out some healing pills from the space, looked at the nearby disciples and said, "These pills are for fellow Taoist Zhang." "Great." Zhang Xiaojiang and the others' storage bags were taken away by the sword cultivator, so how could they have healing pills? Xiao Hua's medicinal pills were a timely rain. Hearing Zhang Xiaojiang's cry, all the surrounding disciples quieted down, and their eyes flashed with surprise. Of course, Xuanyan School was a large sect after all, and the disciples didn't panic when they saw that there was a chance of survival. They all sat down quietly, waiting for Zhang Xiaojiang's rescue. Zhang Xiaojiang took the pills, slightly adjusted his breathing, and walked to the side of the Xuanyan School disciple. He hit this person with a spell, wanting to remove the sword cultivator's restriction. However, he tried several times, but it didn't work. He didn't know if it was because his magic power was insufficient or because the sword cultivator's restriction was strange. Xiao Hua frowned as he watched from the side. He also had the same plan, to let Zhang Xiaojiang save the Xuanyan School disciple himself, and he didn't need to do anything. "Fellow Taoist Xiao," Zhang Xiaojiang said awkwardly, "I ask fellow Taoist Xiao to help." Xiao Hua didn't have anything to decline, but he still asked, "I came here to find a person, may I know which fellow Taoist has seen Xiao Mao?" "Xiao Mao?" Zhang Xiaojiang shook his head slightly. Clearly, he did not know Xiao Mao. "Seen your brother Xiao." A disciple in the distance hurriedly raised his hand and said, "I know Xiao Mao. However, the battle was too chaotic, so I don't know where Xiao Mao is. I don't know if he escaped or, is there anyone else who knows him?" Xiao Huafei asked. With a flick of his sleeve, he removed the restriction on that disciple. The next few disciples also said that they knew Xiao Mao, but none of them could tell where he was. "What should we do?" Xiao Hua frowned. "Perhaps he really escaped?" "Fellow Taoist Xiao, what does Xiao Mao look like? Perhaps other disciples have seen it before?" Zhang Xiaojiang saw that Xiao Hua was somewhat anxious, so he came up with an idea. "Hee, this Xiao really doesn't know what Xiao Mao looks like right now." Xiao Hua laughed. When a disciple who knew Xiao Mao described his appearance, a tall and thin disciple immediately raised his hand and said, "I've seen this disciple before." "How is he?" Xiao Hua immediately removed the restriction on that disciple and asked anxiously. "He was restrained by an illusory sword cultivator and taken away." The disciple thought for a moment and said, "At that time, he was beside this disciple. There were also a few disciples who were taken away." Xiao Hua originally wanted to ask, "Where did they go?" But as soon as the words left his mouth, he felt that something was wrong. How could these disciples know where the illusory sword cultivator went? Sure enough, the disciple smiled bitterly. This disciple was also restrained by the illusory sword cultivator. "I don't know where they went." Thank you very much." Xiao Hua thought for a moment, looked at the hundreds of Xuanyan School disciples' longing eyes, and said with a smile, "Wait a moment. It's not that this Xiao doesn't want to remove the restriction for you, but this place is too dangerous. If this Xiao helps you remove the restriction, this Xiao's magic power will be gone, and I won't even be able to protect myself." Zhang Xiaojiang was somewhat disappointed in his heart. Just as he was about to say something, Xiao Hua said again, "Just like before, stay here obediently. In less than an hour, there will naturally be someone who will take you away." With that, Xiao Hua turned around and was about to leave, but as if he thought of something, he turned around and said a few words to Zhang Xiaojiang. Zhang Xiaozheng's eyes flashed with extraordinary splendor, and then he nodded slightly. With a clap of his hand, he took out a jade slip and handed it to Xiaohua. Xiaohua took it and didn't stay any longer, floating away from the cave. Senior brother Zhang. After Xiaohua left, the disciple familiar with Zhang Xiaozheng couldn't help but ask, "This Xiaohua of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Where did he come from? How could he come to my Xuanyan School's Spirit Stone Vein? How could he easily break the sword formation of a sword cultivator? How could he directly come to this cave?" Zhang Xiaozheng didn't wait for the disciple to finish speaking, and said with a bitter smile, "This brother also doesn't know. I only saw him at the Taiqing Sect's Feather Immortal Assembly dozens of years ago, and we haven't seen each other since then. If it wasn't for the fact that his face didn't change, I wouldn't have been able to recognize him." "Oh my, so he participated in the Feather Immortal Assembly before?" The disciple nodded. No wonder he could so easily. Speaking of this, the disciple looked Zhang Xiaozheng up and down and asked curiously, "Senior brother Zhang, what's this Xiaohua's cultivation level? Since he participated in the Feather Immortal Assembly with you, his cultivation level should be similar to yours. How could he easily enter this place?" The peak of the initial stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. Zhang Xiaozheng had already recovered his cultivation level, so it was very easy for him to sense Xiaohua's concealed cultivation level. He answered without hesitation. Moreover, Xiaohua was only at the 11th layer of the Qi refining realm during the Feather Immortal Assembly. Strange. The disciple was even more confused. Senior brother Zhang couldn't break the sword cultivator's restriction, but he could so easily break it. Then, the disciple looked elsewhere. Those places were naturally the places where the disciples whose restrictions had been broken by Xiaohua tried to break the restriction for others. As for the jade slip that Zhang Xiaozheng gave Xiaohua, no one asked much about it. Everyone thought that it was the price Xiaohua had to pay for saving Zhang Xiaozheng, right? Putting aside the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples who were guessing Xiaohua's mysteriousness, Xiaohua himself came out of the cave and took out the flying sword again. He casually threw it on top of the cave. He didn't know how to set up a sword formation, but who didn't know how to do it? Xiaohua didn't believe that a sword cultivator who was currently busy would come here to check on the sword formation. Besides, he wouldn't give a sword cultivator the time to do so. After capturing a bright sword swordsman and asking about the location of the illusory sword swordsman who stayed behind, Xiaohua flew toward the depths of the Spirit Stone Mine. Chapter 2403. In a brightly lit cave dwelling, Guan Peng was lazily sitting on a jade chair covered in spirit beast fur. His left hand was stretched out and his 5 fingers occasionally flicked as if he was plucking the strings of a zither. A sparkling and translucent jade cup floated above his left hand. As Guan Peng's fingers moved slightly, the jade cup rose and fell. The jade cup was filled with blood-red liquid. As the jade cup rose and fell, several drops of liquid splashed out. Guan Peng pursed his lips and several drops of liquid flew into his mouth. Guan Peng narrowed his eyes as if he was enjoying the taste of the blood-red liquid. After a long while, he opened his eyes and seemed to be talking to himself in his sleep. The taste of this blood crystal is truly ecstasy. These Dao sect cultivators really know how to enjoy themselves. Yes. Wouldn't it be very lonely if one didn't have this kind of spirit wine to pass the time during one's dull cultivation? It's a pity that the warriors of my sword domain have to fight against soul cultivators every day to ensure the safety of our sword domain. What right do you Dao sect cultivators have to sit back and enjoy the credit of a swordsman? After I take down the Spirit Stone Vein, I will replace Xuanyan cult in managing the Spirit Stone Vein. This blood crystal, TVK, I will have to taste it more in the future. Guan Peng was very pleased with himself. Although no one was listening to him, he was still talking. His faint voice drifted within the cave dwelling, sweeping past the jade table, the thick crystal pillars and landing on the luxurious decorations within the cave dwelling. Guan Peng could not help but feel pleased with himself. The sword cultivators had been drooling over the Dao sect's Spirit Stone Vein for a long time. However, during the fight for the Spirit Stone Vein several years ago, the sword cultivators did not gain much of an advantage. Although they controlled a few Spirit Stone Veins, Most of them were similar to the spirit stone vein at Jingquan Mountain and were close to being abandoned. The sword cultivators also realized that while they were beating around the bush to lure the snake out of its hole, the Dao sect cultivators were also taking advantage of the situation and playing hard to get. The Dao sect cultivators were not working behind closed doors like they had imagined. On the other hand, Guan Peng's failing sword manor had received a piece of news. Xuanyan cult had the northernmost spirit stone vein in the Gale snowfield. Of course, this news had not been confirmed. Because the Gale snowfield was originally a part of the sword domain, Dao sect cultivators rarely came here. It was extremely inconvenient for Xuanyan cult to mine spirit stones here and exposed. Therefore, the failing sword manor sent Guan Peng to investigate this matter and see if the news was true or false. They also gave Guan Peng several hundred disciples. Of course, among these several hundred disciples, there were pregnant swords and also unsheathed swords. It was better than nothing. Failing sword manor did not take this matter seriously, but Guan Peng did not think so. He wanted to stand out in the sword battle. Using this opportunity, he not only joined forces with his good friend Liao Chenkong from the Flying Feather sect, but also got to know Yu Ming from the Quilted Mountain sect and Feng Buping from the herd of Macaws Valley. They had planned for a long time and made use of Xuanyan cult's golden core cultivator Pang Chongtian's desire to make a big contribution to the Gale snowfield to set up an ambush to lure the Dao sect cultivators. Of course, luring Pang Chongtian was only a bait. Guan Peng's real goal was to let Pang Chongtian lead them to Xuanyan cult's spirit stone vein and find its location. They had hidden thousands of swordsmen near the Gale snowfield, and these swordsmen were the main force attacking Xuanyan cult's spirit stone vein. Damn it, the heavens are really helping me, allowing me to make a big contribution. Thinking of this, Guan Peng still had a smile on his face. If there were only the four of us illusory swordsmen, this Xuanyan cult's formation would not be easy to break. Who would have thought that someone would come to help at the crucial moment? It's a pity that Pang Chongtian realized his mistake in the end and used his death to activate a secret technique to cover Jiang Shan and the rest's escape. I was ambushed by that bastard, otherwise I would have followed them. Who? Just as Guan Peng was feeling proud, he suddenly sensed something and waved his hand. A red plum blossom bloomed from his hand and rushed through the jade cup in the air. The blood-red spirit wine in the jade cup spilled onto the red plum blossom. The drops of juice were like droplets of blood. Haha, you can actually detect my tracks. Your cultivation is really not bad. Laughing, Xiao Hua's figure appeared on the other side of the cave. Xiao Hua's figure appeared and with a wave of his hand, he took out the yang leaf fan. With a wave of his magic power, a thumb-sized fire snake flew out from the yang leaf fan and pounced on the red plum blossom. Sizzle, with a series of sounds, the fire snake wrapped around the red plum blossom. Like the passion of a rainy night, the fire snake excitedly killed the delicate red plum blossom. Oh, you're not that Seven Skills sect? No, you're a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Seeing Xiao Hua's young face, Guan Peng's expression suddenly changed. Why are you here? Hehe, Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked around. He smiled and said, Is it very important for me to be here? It seems your life is more important than my goal, right? Guan Peng laughed loudly. A Dao sect disciple whose cultivation is not even at the middle stage of foundation establishment dares to threaten me, an illusory swordsman. If this were to spread, wouldn't it be the biggest joke in the world? Yes. Xiao Hua took a step forward and sat down on a jade chair. He rubbed his nose and said with a smile, If an illusory swordsman were to fall at the hands of an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, how big of a joke would that be? Guan Peng clapped his hand and the red plum blossom sword appeared in his hand. The red plum blossom on the withered branch bloomed. If I were you, I wouldn't try it so easily. Xiao Hua coldly looked at the red plum sword without the slightest fear. This Xiao wants to make a deal with you with great sincerity. If you insist on teasing this Xiao's bottom line, this Xiao doesn't believe that a seriously injured illusory swordsman can escape from this Xiao's hands. You talk too much. How could Guan Peng take Xiao Hua's words to heart? With a wave of his hand, the red plum blossom sword appeared. Red plum blossoms the size of a fist flashed with a sword intent that could kill everything in winter. They swarmed toward Xiaohua like a swarm of bees. Wherever the red plum blossoms passed, traces of coldness were drawn in, causing the water element's spiritual energy in the air to flicker with a faint light of ice. Hiss, sure enough, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hastily flew up from the jade chair and waved his sun leaf fan again. A fist-sized fireball flew out from the sun leaf fan like the rising sun and rushed into the air. The flames on the fireball burned fiercely, illuminating the entire cave and all the red plum blossoms. Explode, Xiaohua coldly shouted. The fireball exploded with a loud bang. Countless tiny flame fragments fluttered like fireflies and rushed toward the red plum blossoms. Swish, swish, a series of burning sounds could be heard. Guanpeng's red plum blossom flying sword was completely enveloped in flames. Whenever the flame threads approached the red plum blossoms, an irresistible heat wave would immediately break the ice of the red plum blossoms. The red plum blossoms were gradually annihilated by the fierce sword light in the cave. Similarly, the sparks also slowly disappeared. You're just a junior who relies on magic treasures. Seeing the power of Xiaohua's sun leaf fan, Guanpeng forcibly suppressed the boiling sword origin in his body. He opened his mouth and a small dark red sword whistled toward Xiaohua. As the small sword flew out, a slight blush appeared on Guanpeng's face. Moreover, the sword light around his body also flickered frequently. Xiaohua was also somewhat flustered. He waved his sun leaf fan with all his might. Another fireball that was slightly smaller than the previous one flew out and met the small sword. The small sword was very agile. It shuttled back and forth between several zhang as if it was dodging the fireball. However, the fireball was not inferior. It blocked the small sword and prevented it from passing through. Swish, the small sword saw that it could not avoid it and stabbed toward the fireball. The fireball suddenly lit up and was immediately annihilated. The small sword actually pierced through the fireball and stabbed toward Xiaohua's face with incomparable speed. Kikidisk, Xiaohua's face was a little panicked, but he still clicked his tongue. His figure flashed quickly, and in an instant he dodged the flying sword. Then he waved his Yang Yi fan again, and a fire net covered the entire small sword. Seeing Xiaohua's fast-flying technique, Guanpeng suddenly thought of a name and said with some astonishment, You're that terrifying phoenix from the Imperial Thunder sect? Not bad, it's really me. Xiaohua's figure floated down and looked at Guanpeng with interest. His face was immensely proud. Since you know it's me, you still dare to provoke me? However, since you've already made your move, don't blame me for being ruthless. As he spoke, he raised his sun leaf fan again and waved it toward Guanpeng. Wait, at this moment, Guanpeng suddenly raised his hand and said, Terrifying Phoenix, you said you wanted to make a deal with this old man. I wonder what it is? What? Are you afraid? Xiaohua's face showed a trace of pride. The waving of his sun leaf fan stopped and the brilliance on it also slowly extinguished. Afraid? Guanpeng laughed loudly. You're only a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Even if you have some secret technique, can you resist this old man's illusory sword technique? You're called Terrifying Phoenix, but you're just a shining swordsman. That's the name of a swordsman. To be honest, in this old man's eyes, it's just a joke. Xiaohua's face alternated between red and green, as if he was very embarrassed. He said with a bit of shame and anger, Since that's the case, this Xiao is too lazy to make any deal with you. Come, this Xiao wants to see who will die here today. As he spoke, he waved his sun leaf fan again. Little friend Xiao, don't be impatient. Guanpeng saw Xiaohua's shame and anger and hurriedly waved his hand. However, he was secretly amused and said to himself, This little cultivator fishing for fame. If you're not afraid, then make your move. Xiaohua said coldly and looked again at the small sword trapped in the fire net. Guanpeng laughed and casually sat down. He resumed his previous lazy appearance and methodically poured a cup of blood crystal. He took a sip and said, Little friend Xiao, have you drunk this blood crystal before? This. Xiaohua was stunned and didn't understand Guanpeng's meaning. After a while, he replied, this Xiao doesn't like spiritual wine. I don't know what blood crystal is. Chapter 2404. Oh, you don't know what blood crystal is, so how do you know it's spiritual wine? Guanpeng ignored the small sword that was enveloped by the fire net and continued to speak patiently. What do you mean? Xiaohua was a bit anxious, as if he had something on his mind. Little friend Xiao, don't be anxious. Guanpeng laughed. My life is in your hands, but I'm not anxious. What are you anxious about? Could it be that you're afraid I won't be able to complete the deal with you if I die? This. Xiaohua was a bit speechless. Hee, I don't mean anything by saying this. I just want to tell you that just like you know blood crystal is the best spiritual wine in Xuanyan school, but you don't have the chance to taste it. My flying sword is indeed trapped by you, but if you want to kill me, you won't have the chance either. At the very least, I can use a sword cultivation secret technique to drag you down with me. I don't believe you, Xiaohua said resolutely. You don't believe me? You can try. Guanpeng leisurely took a sip of spiritual wine, squinted his eyes, and quietly looked at Xiaohua. Xiaohua waved his sun leaf fan, and flames burst out from the fan, like a roaring fire phoenix. However, this fire phoenix flew up a few feet and then fell back down. Xiaohua sat down with a smile. How could I be an unintelligent person, falling into your trap? Hee, little friend Xiao is indeed powerful. Guanpeng didn't miss the opportunity to flatter Xiaohua, as expected of a terrifying phoenix. It's nothing. Xiaohua's eyes were filled with pride. I'm only here to negotiate with you. If I take your life, it's not worth it. Oh, right, I still haven't asked for your name? I'm Guanpeng from Flying Spirit Mountain Village. Guanpeng didn't hide and said generously. Good, Senior Guan. Xiaohua also cupped his hands and said, Senior is older than me. Here, there's no difference between Dao and sword. I'll call you Senior. Little friend Xiao is indeed talented. Guanpeng smiled and returned the greeting. All right, I won't waste any more time. Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and said, when I used the secret technique to come in, the sword cultivation disciples were cultivating. Someone might come in a while. I'm very scared. Hee, it's good that little friend Xiao knows. Guanpeng was still smiling. You and I are only here to discuss a deal. If both sides benefit, then I won't cause any more problems. We can't talk about mutual benefits right now. Xiaohua didn't hide anything and said very honestly, Senior Guan can only use his life to agree to this Xiao's conditions. And, go ahead, this old man is listening. Guanpeng did not hesitate and asked in a low voice. Xiaohua thought for a moment. His eyes turned slightly as if he was thinking of something. Guanpeng saw it clearly. Ha, Senior Guan, Xiaohua looked around and said with a smile, it seems that there are 3 senior illusory swords in the Gale snowfield, right? Where did they go? Them? Guanpeng sneered. They naturally went to Yinyang. They naturally went to the place they wanted to go. If they were here, how could this old man, Yinyang? Xiaohua frowned. However, he couldn't stay here any longer. He wanted to use a thunderous method to restrain Guanpeng, or even kill him. The problem was that he wanted to know where Xiao Mao was taken to by the illusory swordsman. He didn't know if his Buddhist sect's divine ability would be able to obtain the information he wanted from Guanpeng's soul. After all, a sword cultivator had fought with a soul cultivator for many years. Xiaohua couldn't take that risk. Since they aren't here, this Xiao can rest assured. Xiaohua nodded slightly. Guanpeng suddenly asked, could it be that you didn't encounter it? Xiaohua was stunned. It's fine. Guanpeng sneered. If you met them, you wouldn't be standing here right now. Xiaohua didn't say anything. What about Ling Yunwu? Guanpeng asked again. Who is Ling Yunwu? Xiaohua asked curiously, then sneered. Don't try to stall for time, this Xiao is the one asking you questions. Ling Yunwu naturally died at Golden Spring Mountain. Forget it, what does the Ling Feng sword sect have to do with this old man? This old man doesn't need to care about their life or death. Tell me, what kind of deal do you want to make with this old man? Guan Peng sighed slightly and asked again. Xiao Hua smiled, looked at the small sword within the flames, and said, actually, what this Xiao wants to do, does Senior not know? Do you still need this Xiao to say it? You want to save those hundreds of cultivators from Xuanyan school? Guan Peng said proudly. Clap clap, Xiao Hua clapped and laughed. Talking to smart people is really easy. This Xiao hasn't even opened my mouth, yet Senior already knows. That's impossible. Guan Peng flatly refused. Those are hundreds of cultivators. To this old man, it's a great merit. This old man definitely can't let it go. Yes, to Senior, it's a great merit. But to this Xiao, isn't it also a great merit? Xiao Hua laughed loudly. This Xiao braved death to come here, isn't it for this merit? If you have the heart, save those hundreds of cultivators from the hands of my sword cultivators, your merit will be even greater. Guan Peng said disdainfully. Xiao Hua smiled with interest. How do you know this Xiao didn't save those 400 cultivators? Why do you think this Xiao won't fight? You actually really saved those 400 cultivators? Guan Peng was somewhat astonished. How could there be 400? Xiao Hua was angry. There are less than 200 cultivators left. Guan Peng was also angry. You only have 200 cultivators left. What about my swordsmen? How many did you kill? In a sword battle, you and I are enemies. What's the point of saying so much? Sigh, yes. Xiao Hua sighed. It's precisely because of this that this Xiao came to negotiate with you. Don't tell me you also captured my hundreds of swordsmen? Guan Peng was clearly somewhat astonished. Xiao Hua said honestly, this Xiao doesn't have any swordsmen. This Xiao only has you, the illusory swordsman. You don't seem to have completely controlled this old man, right? You have too much confidence in yourself. Guan Peng had an indescribable smile on his face, as if he didn't care about Xiao Hua's threat at all. Xiao Hua was very clear in his heart that Guan Peng had just forcefully activated his natal sword origin, causing his injuries to worsen again. If he hadn't forcefully supported himself in front of him and fought for leverage, he would have already collapsed. However, Xiao Hua didn't expose him and said with a smile, this matter isn't just based on words. If Senior doesn't want to make a deal with this Xiao, then just say it, we'll part ways. Of course, seeing Guan Peng's somewhat cold face, Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, how can Senior's life be compared to those several hundred Xuanyan school disciples? Senior has taken down Xuanyan school's spirit stone mine. This kind of great merit. Since the start of the war, how many people have been able to achieve this kind of great merit? However, if the person who achieved this great merit silently passes away, wouldn't that be a pity? This merit would just be taken advantage of by others. This old man is fighting for sword domain. How can I care about these false merits and false reputation? Guan Peng replied with a stern expression. This old man would rather die together with you, and definitely won't make an unscrupulous deal with you. Sigh, admirable, admirable. Xiao Hua cupped his hands, his face extremely respectful, and said, I didn't think that there would be such a righteous person like Senior among sword cultivators. Guan Peng sneered. Pity. Xiao Hua turned his head and sneered again. Pity that Senior is dead. Who would still remember Senior? That Ling Yunwu, the swordsman that Senior mentioned just now, to be honest, they didn't die in this Xiao's hands, but they were trapped by the great array of Mount Quanjin and died in the end. But their deaths, who is responsible for it now? Isn't it this Xiao's head? Who would still think of the dead Ling Yunwu? When mentioning him, they would first mention this Xiao. Their deaths can only make this Xiao's name. What else can it do? Immediately after, Xiao Hua looked at Guan Peng's small sword and said with a sinister smile, naturally, Senior can also sacrifice his life for righteousness. Then, in the end, it will also make this Xiao. Another illusory swordsman's death is related to the terrifying phoenix. Why wouldn't this Xiao be happy? Actually, I won't hide it from Senior. This Xiao came this time to kill Senior, but seeing Senior, we can be considered to have hit it off, so I said a few more words. Guan Peng coldly looked at Xiao Hua. He wanted to urge the flying sword more than once, but that flying sword only had a trace of connection with him. It wanted to rush out of Xiaohua's fire net several times, but it was all to no avail. He clearly knew that Xiaohua's magic power was only so. If his sword origin wasn't damaged, Xiaohua definitely wouldn't be his opponent. Unfortunately, this was only if, in this world, there was never anything lucky. Didn't Xiaohua see through this point, so he stood here facing an illusory swordsman and spoke with assurance? Little friend Xiao, if you could remove the seal of those hundreds of cultivators, you wouldn't have come to find this old man, right? Guan Peng didn't miss the opportunity to remind him. That's right. Xiaohua didn't hide anything. This is also one of the reasons why this Xiao came. At the same time, it's also because of this that Senior has the opportunity to enjoy this so-called blood crystal. As Xiaohua spoke, he flicked his finger, and a thumb-sized fireball mysteriously appeared near Guan Peng. With a peng sound, it shattered the jade cup filled with blood crystal, and that fireball swallowed the spirit wine in the jade cup, turning everything into ashes in a moment. Samadhi true fire? Guan Peng's eyes narrowed, seeming to be a little angry and a little surprised. Little friend Xiao really has some skills. Are you trying to show off your power to this old man? Hee, since you sword cultivators call me a terrifying phoenix, how can this Xiao let down sword cultivators love? Xiaohua smiled proudly. As for showing off my power? It's not that. This Xiao is just reminding Senior to not have any superfluous thoughts. Alright, this Xiao will take his leave first. I will wait for Senior's decision. As he spoke, Xiaohua waved his hand, and the magic power in his hand surged. That fire net, carrying Guan Peng's small sword, slowly flew to Xiaohua's side. Xiaohua's hand seemed to be holding a 1,000-gene heavy object. Withdraw. Xiaohua formed a hand seal, and that fire net gradually shrank. After it turned into a ball, it fell into Xiaohua's sleeve. Then, Xiaohua glanced at Guan Peng, slowly walked out of the cave, and disappeared. Calm to vote for it. Chapter 2405. Seeing Xiaohua leave, Guan Peng narrowed his eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking. He had a kind of intuition that Xiaohua had used the secret technique from before to hide near the abode. If he wanted to escape or send a message to others, Xiaohua would definitely appear without hesitation and kill him. Immediately, that kind of feeling of being bullied by dogs, which had always filled his heart, incomparably reached the lowest limit. A foundation establishment cultivator. Even if he concealed his cultivation, he's only a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. He actually dares to threaten me in front of me. Guan Peng's heart was unsettled. Hundreds of thoughts came one after another. But in the end, they all turned into, even if he's a foundation establishment cultivator, but today, as long as he makes a move, my life will be gone. If my life is gone, what merit is there to talk about? It seemed that everything he thought of just now had become a pipe dream. Guan Peng's heart was extremely conflicted. Looking at a place in the abode where Xiaohua seemed to be hiding, Guan Peng clenched his teeth and shouted, "Men!" Not long after, a swordsman with a bright sword cultivation ran in. He bowed and asked, "Martial Uncle Guan, do you have any orders? Call Guan Qi over." Guan Peng's command made that sword cultivator baffled. Yes, this disciple understands. That sword cultivator didn't understand why Guan Peng didn't send a summoning talisman to call Guan Qi. He only bowed and left. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, another sword cultivator who looked somewhat similar to Guan Peng quickly walked in. He looked around and bowed. "Uncle Zhu, what orders do you have?" Guan Qi, I just received a message from your Grandmaster Feng. He has some ideas." Guan Peng pondered over his words. He wants to use the several hundred disciples of Xuanyan school as bait to ambush some Dao sect cultivators. Or perhaps, he would let these cultivators lead his disciples to attack some of the Dao sect's mines. I'm a bit hesitant right now and want to discuss it with you. Very good. Guan Qi only thought for a moment before nodding. Grandmaster Feng is an expert. He must have a certain degree of certainty for him to have such an idea. Moreover, he doesn't use my failing sword manners disciples, so why shouldn't we? But what if he fails and these disciples escape? Guanping asked. Don't worry, Guanping waved his hand and said, most of these Taoist sect disciples are at the aura refining stage. There are only a few foundation establishment stage disciples. They are merely the coolies of Xuanyan school, so there's no point in keeping them. Besides, who knows how many cultivators we've killed in the Spirit Stone mine? These several hundred cultivators are nothing. And I understand. How about this, I'll leave this matter to you. Guanping nodded. I presume you already know some of the secret passages of the Spirit Stone veins? Yes, I do know. Guanqi smiled apologetically. Even if I don't know, I can just look for that Tao sect cultivator. Don't tell me they don't want to live? Good. Guanping asked again, what are you going to do? Guanqi was a bit puzzled as to why Guanping would ask such a detailed question today. However, he still replied respectfully, although I'll handle this matter, I still want all the swordsmen in the Spirit Stone mine to know. I plan to find a few close disciples and tell them the reason for this matter. Then, I'll lead those Tao sect cultivators into the secret passage. When they've all flown away, I'll pretend to notice, and not bad. Let's do that. Guanping waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything more. You have to make sure they can really escape. Don't let Feng Buping find fault with us. I understand. Uncle Zhu, please don't worry. Guanqi bowed and retreated. Little friend Xiao, did you hear that clearly? Guanping coldly said to the corner. Unfortunately, his voice echoed in the cave, but there was no movement. Guanping knew that it was impossible for Xiao Hua to let go at this moment. He could only force himself to get up, slap his hand, take out a medicinal pill and put it in his mouth. Then he once again weakly sat down. As expected, in less than half a meal's time, a faint clamor could be heard from outside the cave. A third-grade swordsman with a drawn sword hastily ran in, urgently reporting to Martial Uncle Guan. For some unknown reason, the close to 400 Xuanyan school disciples imprisoned in the Spirit Stone mine have all suddenly escaped through the secret passageway. There's actually such a thing? Guanping slapped the table and stood up, saying angrily, what are you all doing? Why didn't you keep a close watch? Reporting to Martial Uncle. That disciple's forehead was covered in sweat. Those 400 cultivators were all imprisoned by my sword cultivator's forbidden technique. Their cultivators are simply unable to break it. Moreover, a sword formation was placed at the entrance of the cave. Without Jindan cultivation, it's absolutely impossible to enter. So you all neglected your duties? Guanping said angrily. Martial Uncle, please forgive me. That disciple immediately knelt down and said anxiously, presumably, that Jindan cultivator who escaped earlier came in through the secret passage again. Yes, it must be so. Guanpeng's eyes turned and said urgently, quick, inform all the disciples to be careful of that Jindan cultivator. This old man, cough cough, this old man will go take a look right now. As he spoke, Guanping struggled to get up and slowly flew up several feet before falling down again. He waved his hand and said, quickly go inform them, this old man will catch up soon. That disciple said with concern, Martial Uncle, you can take your time. Those Tao sect disciples have already escaped quite far away with the Jindan cultivator. The disciples who are chasing after them might not be able to encounter them. Sigh, this old man neglected that Jindan cultivator, and that secret passage. Guanping sighed slightly and waved his hand to indicate that disciple to leave. How is it, little friend Xiao? Guanping asked softly in a probing manner. His figure stood at the entrance of the cave and did not return to his seat. Not bad. Xiaohua's voice suddenly resounded throughout the cave. It was impossible to identify where he was. Since Senior keeps his word, this Xiao cannot be an untrustworthy person. As his voice fell, Guanpeng's small life sword actually flew in from outside the cave. Guanpeng did not dare to be negligent. He first smiled with his divine sense, then opened his mouth and the small sword entered it. Senior, we will meet again someday. Xiaohua's voice once again resounded outside the cave. We will meet again someday? Guanpeng coldly snorted, then slowly walked out of the cave. He even felt tired of staying in this cave for a moment longer. Guan Peng thought that Xiaohua had already flown out of the spirit stone vein. After exiting the cave, he immediately formed a seal and entered the cave. He patted his hand and took out the jade talisman that Zhang Xiaozheng gave him. After looking at it for a moment, the corner of his mouth slightly curled up and he fled in a certain direction. After traveling for the time it took to eat a meal, Xiaohua arrived at a very secretive place. He saw that this was a cave densely covered with restrictions. Above the cave, there was a faintly flickering brilliance that overflowed with different runes. The runes contained an extremely strong magic power fluctuation, indicating that the restriction here was extremely powerful. Xiaohua extended his left hand and opened his Dharma eye. After looking for a moment, he once again fled into the cave's stone wall. When he reached the top of the cave, he discovered the weak point of the entire formation. Immediately after, Xiaohua took out the rabbit spirit talisman and struck it on the formation, easily entering the cave. He had already made sufficient preparations, but when he saw the neatly arranged spirit stones that were as dazzling as moonlight stones in the cave, he could not help but click his tongue in amazement. After no less than an hour, Xiaohua finally left the spirit stone vein. He concealed himself and flew into the air with a satisfied smile on his face. After flying for 100 miles, Xiaohua finally revealed himself. He frowned as he thought. According to what that sword cultivator disciple said, the only place nearby that can be called Yin-Yang is the Yin-Yang Twin Spring Mountain. There definitely isn't any other place. However, why did those illusory swordsmen bring Xiao Mao and the others to the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain? Do I need to call Li Zongbao? But immediately after, Xiaohua shook his head. Forget it, Li Zongbao only barely has the strength of an early-stage gold core. He just killed a few bright swordsmen and consumed a lot of his true essence. How can he deal with the illusory swordsman? Or Mo La will lose his life. Besides, this young master will have to show his skills again. He claims to be number 1 under gold core. If I let him see, wouldn't he be ashamed? It's better not to call him. Finished thinking, the sound of wind and thunder appeared around Xiaohua's body. He used thunder-controlling movement and flew towards the north where he saw the smoke rising from. Speaking of which, Xiaohua was worried about Xiao Mao, so he pushed his imperial lightning travel to its limits. His entire body was like a bolt of lightning as he streaked across the sky. The rumbling sound of thunder tore apart the few faint clouds above the snowy region. AI, this thunder-controlling movement is fast, but it's too arrogant. Xiaohua tried his best to hide the sound of wind and thunder, but the faster he flew, the louder the sound of wind and thunder. If I reach the realm of Thunderclap 9th heaven, I'm afraid that when this young master goes out, there will be thunder everywhere. Damn it, this young master can be awe-inspiring at that time, but now? It's better to keep a low profile. Thinking about the act he put on in front of Guan Peng, Xiaohua was secretly proud. It was not difficult for him to control Guan Peng, but it was difficult for him to make Guan Peng feel that he only had the strength to control Guan Peng. He definitely could not let Guan Peng feel that he could easily kill Guan Peng. Otherwise, the bird cultivator senior that Feng Buping's talisman would most likely notice Xiaohua through Guan Peng. Feng Buping already had the strength of nascent soul. What cultivation level could the senior he spoke of be at? Xiaohua used his heel to think and knew that he definitely could not deal with it. Even thunder-controlling sect probably could not deal with it either. He had better hide his tail. Thinking of Feng Buping, Xiaohua secretly pondered, this Feng Buping, what kind of bird cultivator is he? He actually knows wind-controlling movement. And his cultivation is so powerful. And the most powerful thing is that he can tear apart space. I don't know if this secret technique was cultivated by him, or all the abilities of the spirit bird he possessed. This wind-controlling movement is very similar to Empress's wind-controlling movement. The spirit bird that this guy possessed couldn't be Empress, right? Or perhaps he has some sort of relationship with Her Highness? Chapter 2406. Of course, Xiaohua was just thinking about it. Even if Feng Buping was related to the Empress, he could not say anything about the Empress, Nor could he not kill Feng Buping. Moreover, the Empress was an expert more powerful than a nascent soul cultivator. How could she be refined by Feng Buping? It's a pity that Feng Buping did not leave anything useful behind. What's the use of this shitty inner core bead? Xiaohua had already put the bead into the space, but Goldie, who always liked inner cores, opened its hazy eyes and just sniffed it with its nose and ignored it. Xiaohua intuitively felt that this bead was not a good thing. Maybe it can control the wind? Xiaohua waved his hand and the fist-sized bead appeared in his hand. However, there was no change in the heaven and earth spiritual qi around Xiaohua. Even the faint blue light on the bead did not appear. Xiaohua hesitated for a moment. In the end, he did not dare to immerse his divine sense into the bead. He had a faint sense of vigilance in his heart. Feng Buping would not give up his physical body so easily. Moreover, there were too many strange things on Dawn Rain Continent. If he was not prepared, he would not act rashly like he did in the past. After putting away the wind bead properly, Xiaohua took out Feng Buping's magic staff and weighed it in his hand. He smiled and said, "This thing is not bad. If I have time to integrate it into the magic staff, it can add a little weight." These two things were probably the result of Xiaohua and Feng Buping's life and death battle. If compared to Xiaohua's loss, it was really nothing. Xiaohua put away the magic staff and once again unwillingly sensed his primordial spirit and avatar. There was no reaction at all. Damn it, isn't this avatar unable to leave the body? It's already very good for me to be able to cultivate 200 feet away. What about now? I'm afraid it can't be calculated by miles, right? Suddenly, Xiaohua had another thought. He hurriedly sent his primordial spirit into the hand of karma. That sliver of primordial spirit was like a fish swimming freely in the hand of the primordial spirit. There seemed to be some profound feelings that entered Xiaohua's mind, but it also seemed like those feelings were just like a spring dream without any trace. Forget it, forget it. Xiaohua was a little angry. He impatiently pulled his primordial spirit out. The left and right Dharmakayas were also obtained out of thin air. If I lose them, then so be it. Wait for me to get some true blood from somewhere else, then I'll just cultivate another one. Of course, this idea of Xiaohua's was just a random thought that came out of his vexation. But after this idea came out, it was like a seed that had fallen into a smelly ditch, growing uncontrollably. That's right, this young master's delusions aren't without reason. Since the disciples of the cultivation aristocratic families have the bloodline of the real bloodline and can produce Dharmakayas, why can't this young master fuse with the bloodline of the real bloodline and produce Dharmakayas? Besides, didn't bird cultivators and beast cultivators use themselves as cauldrons to transfer the true spirits of spirit beasts into their cauldrons for cultivation? Wasn't this the same principle as the cultivation of true blood in the cultivation families? Could it be that the bird cultivators, the beast cultivators, and the cultivation aristocratic families are somehow related? It's a pity that I don't have the secret cultivation method of the true blood of a cultivation family. I wonder if that bastard Cui Hongshan has it. Even if he has it, I'm afraid he won't show it to me. Xiaohua scratched his head. I reckon I'll have to think of another way. If I can refer to it, perhaps the cultivation method of the mighty Vajra Dharmakayas can also be used on the bloodline of the real bloodline? Or perhaps I can cultivate another Dharmakayas. When had the always stingy Xiaohua suffered such a big loss? It was inevitable that he would constantly grumble in his heart, wanting to find an opportunity to recoup this loss. However, Xiaohua didn't think about the number of top-grade spirit stones in his space. Even Xuanyan School would be heartbroken by that amount. Of course, Guanpeng wouldn't be heartbroken. That bastard simply wouldn't know that there were so many spirit stones. Time always passed quickly when one was calculating. 2 days later, Xiaohua's eyes were filled with a hazy fog. He saw endless fog rising from the ground and mountain ranges in the distance of hundreds or even thousands of li, rushing straight up into the sky. This fog was also different from normal. It floated up for thousands of zhang, but still didn't condense. It was still in that kind of gaseous state. If this area wasn't too big and the fog wasn't transparent, Xiaohua would have really thought that he had arrived at Yulien Mountain. Such a large area. Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over and couldn't help but be a bit flabbergasted. Previously, when he followed Li Zongbao from afar, he only saw a small area. Moreover, that sword cultivator also said Yin Yang Twin Spring Mountain. Twin Spring Mountain, as the name suggests, one mountain and one spring. How could Xiao Hua have thought that there were so many mountains and so many springs? How should I find it? Xiao Hua frowned. His figures slightly descended and rushed into the continuous fog. But inside the fog, there was another scene. Similar to the other places in the Gale snowfield, this Twin Spring Mountain was also an ice lake. However, there was no thick layer of ice on top of the ice lake. Instead, it was a faint green color. However, within these green ripples, there were many fountains. Some were high and some were low, and they were spurting out. The high ones were more than 10 zhang, and the low ones were only a few feet. Are these all spurting out from the ground? Xiao Hua was very curious. He unconsciously flew to a fountain. This fountain was several zhang tall and had already left the surface of the lake. It immediately emitted a steaming mist that continuously soared into the sky. The water droplets that were like scattered flowers also flew towards the surface of the lake from several zhang above. Countless ripples appeared on the surface of the lake near the fountain. Accompanied by the sound of the water droplets falling on the surface, it was really like rain hitting a banana leaf. This water is extremely hot. Xiao Hua thought to himself as he stroked the fountain with his hand. Then he looked at the other fountain. That fountain was right beside this fountain, and it was only 3 meters tall. The water droplets that it sprayed out were obviously larger than the water droplets from this fountain. Moreover, there was no mist coming out of it. Instead, it was replaced by fine mist that looked like ice shards. The water droplets fell on the surface of the lake and seemed to have condensed. However, when they fell into the lake, they could no longer be found. Xiao Hua also touched it with his hand. He knew that this water was extremely cold. Yin Yang Twin Spring Mountain. Xiao Hua flew up again and pondered. I'm afraid that these two springs are different. This is actually similar to the Yin Yang spring water in the Mo Zhao Black Forest. However, seeing that there are so many things, it is also normal. It can't be too rare. Oh, while Xiao Hua was flying, there were some faint flashes on the surface of the lake in the distance. Xiao Hua couldn't help but notice it. It's actually a rain lotus? The rain lotus was a kind of spiritual flower. It was born after the rain, and when the rain stopped, it was somewhat similar to the rainbow epiphyllum. It was not considered a precious spiritual object, but it was rare, so it appeared to be rare. Xiao Hua had only heard of it, but had never seen it before. He didn't expect that he would be able to see it today in the Huan country in the far west. Chapter 2407. In the misty rain 100 zhang away, the large rain lotus emerged from the sparkling lake. First, it was a round ball wrapped in green leaves. The surrounding fountains sprinkled droplets of water onto it. Each droplet of water was sparkling and translucent, slowly rolling. When Xiao Hua flew another 100 zhang, the green ball suddenly trembled slightly, like the trembling eyelashes of a beauty. Following the trembling of the ball, the green leaves slowly and shyly opened. It only opened a crack, and countless droplets of water fell, and the leaves actually closed again. Damn it, am I seeing things? Xiao Hua was flying in the air. He almost thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He almost rubbed his eyes. However, at this moment, the green leaf opened up again. A faintly discernible brilliance flashed out from the green leaf. It was like a halo that slowly spread out. It streaked across the blue water, streaked across the fountain, and streaked across Xiao Hua, who was flying over. Just as Xiao Hua was focusing on the brilliance, a fist-sized pink flower bud had unknowingly appeared from the green leaves of the rain lotus. The pink flower bud was densely covered with fine lines. Every line seemed to be trembling, and Xiao Hua's heart was somewhat intoxicated by it. Pa! With a soft sound, the flower bud opened up a slit in the middle, and an extremely light fragrance diffused out from the slit. This fragrance was admittedly light, but it was extremely fast. Xiao Hua's nose could already faintly smell it. When this fragrance entered his nose, Xiaohua immediately felt his heart calm and his mind clear, and all the previous worries disappeared without a trace. The slit opened up extremely quickly. Xiaohua only took a deep breath and was slightly intoxicated. The slit had already opened up, and 4 to 5 petals stretched out, revealing 3 to 4 stamens that were about the length of a finger. Leaving aside the fact that the petals were pink, the petals were mottled with spots that resembled raindrops. On top of the stamen, at the tip of the delicate stamen, there was a thumb-sized pink ball that was slightly swaying in the wind. In that instant, Xiaohua actually saw a trace of beauty in that pink color. At this time, Xiaohua had only flown a few dozen zhang, and was still some distance away from the rain lotus. Wonderful! Xiaohua took a deep breath and sighed inwardly. I, a cultivator, want to be the master of my life. Don't tell me I want to do something brilliant in my short lifespan and carve my name in the world. Based on my previous thoughts, isn't such a move a fight for fame and fortune? Looking at the rain lotus in the far north, it only had a short lifespan of a few breaths, but in the blink of an eye, the beauty of the rain lotus was so moving. Who would be able to see such a moving scene? If I didn't come here occasionally, I would definitely not have seen this treasure. Moreover, after this moment, this treasure will be destroyed again. Who knows when it will be opened again? But even if he were to open up again, it wouldn't be this time. Even a spirit flower can bloom with its own beauty. Even if we cultivators don't fight for fame and fortune, we still have to show off our elegance in the world, right? Yes, with my current cultivation, I have more than enough to protect myself in the battle of sword cultivators. However, just protecting myself alone won't be enough to show off my skills. Xiaohua thought again. Moreover, after the Battle of Golden Spring Mountain, I, Cui Hongshan and the rest have all performed meritorious deeds. If nothing unexpected happens, we will be sent back to the Imperial Thunder Sect. However, with just these meritorious deeds, it is still far from being worthy of Fairy Hongxia. If I want to enter the eyes of the Huanhua sect, I still have to perform more meritorious deeds. For example, killing Qin Jian. Actually, although Xiaohua thought so, he still had some hesitation in his heart. He was different from Li Zongbao. He didn't have any foundation. Moreover, it was obvious that he had a great enemy whose goal he didn't know. Now, he only wanted to raise his cultivation without anyone noticing him. Only then could he escape the fate of being someone else's chess piece. In fact, he wasn't even sure if anyone was paying attention to him. He only shrunk his neck like an ostrich, thinking that he didn't attract anyone's attention. However, there was one thing he was clear about. If he didn't perform meritorious deeds, others might notice him. However, as long as he performed meritorious deeds, he would definitely attract the attention of others. Condense the core. I must condense it. I must not attract the attention of others. Xiaohua was still hesitating. At this moment, he could only think like this. Moreover, even if I condense the core, I still have to build my foundation. Just as Xiaohua thought of this, he was already less than 200 feet away from the rain lotus. At this moment, the stamen of the rain lotus had already begun to bend. The faint fragrance had already gradually disappeared. The pink petals that were like the skin of a delicate girl were showing signs of withering. Whoosh! At this moment, from an extremely cold fountain, a small white snake suddenly emerged. It landed on the rain lotus and a scarlet snake tongue flicked out. The delicate stem of the stamen broke upon contact and the thumb-sized stamen fell. In a flash, it was swallowed into the white snake's mouth. Following which, the white snake flicked its tail into the sparkling green pond water and disappeared. However, just as the white snake was swinging its tail, the snake's black eyes fiercely and coldly glanced at Xiaohua. Xiaohua was obviously caught off guard. However, just as the white snake stretched out its head to swallow the rain lotus, he had already reacted. He waved his left hand and was about to use heaven and earth sleeve. However, seeing the white snake, Xiaohua couldn't help but whisper, "Little White?" However, this white snake was obviously not Little White. Xiaohua's hand also stopped. After all, the rain lotus was useless to Xiaohua. However, It was extremely useful to the white snake. Moreover, the rain lotus was about to wither. Looking at the white snake's appearance, if Xiaohua didn't fly over, it would have already eaten it. It was no wonder that the white snake glared at Xiaohua. Did he want to delay his cultivation? However, the white snake's glare was quite vivid, causing Xiaohua, who had just received benefits from the rain lotus, to twitch his mouth. Seeing the rain lotus slowly retracting back into the lake water, Xiaohua's heart moved. He formed a water-dispelling seal and rushed into the lake water. He saw that under the lake water, a few feet away, there was a pink arm-like root. At this time, it had already begun to slowly sink into the lake water. Xiaohua knew that this must be the root of the rain lotus. He didn't hesitate to stretch out his hand, wanting to put the root into his space. However, at this time, an ice-cold water arrow emerged from under Xiaohua's body and directly pierced towards Xiaohua's lower body. Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense and knew that it was the white snake from before. "Can't you stab somewhere else?" Xiaohua was angry. He waved his hand and released a confinement technique. Contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, the white snake was actually a lot more flexible in the water than in the air. His confinement technique was actually dodged by the white snake. This white snake is a bit strange. However, immediately after, the white snake moved a few more times and continuously spat out ice thorns from its mouth. Each of them pierced towards Xiaohua's lower body. Never ending. Xiaohua was angry. He stretched out his hand and slightly bent his 5 fingers. A powerful force was produced from his hand. A whirling current appeared in the lake water and rushed towards the white snake. The white snake saw that the situation wasn't good. It curled its tail and quickly rushed into a nearby huge rock wall and disappeared. He was molested by a little white snake. Xiaohua was a bit resentful. However, he still didn't have the thought of killing the little white snake. However, just as Xiaohua put the root of the rain lotus into his space and was about to fly out of the lake water, a dozen little white snakes suddenly appeared from the uneven rock wall with many small holes. They all spat out ice thorns. Each of the ice thorns pierced towards Xiaohua's lower body. Courting death. Xiaohua was indeed angry. A little white snake molesting him was one thing, but you actually teamed up with a dozen little white snakes to molest him. Do you really think that I, your father, am a gigolo? Go! Xiaohua waved his hand, and a dozen or so fireballs flew out and struck towards the dozen or so little white snakes. However, to Xiaohua's surprise, the moment the scorching fireballs flew out of Xiaohua's hand, they were immediately annihilated, and not a single spark was left behind. This lake water is really strange. I'm afraid it's because of the extreme cold and extreme heat? Xiaohua didn't have time to think about it. He also waved his hand. A dozen thick ice thorns also appeared and shot towards the dozen little white snakes. However, contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, the dozen ice thorns also melted and couldn't pierce through. Are you kidding me? Xiaohua could only fly up and dodge the little white snake's ice thorns. Looks like the fire and water attributes are all useless. Xiaohua thought for a moment. Then he opened his mouth and the Death Dream sword flew out. It shook slightly and turned into 16 flying swords, quickly stabbing towards the dozen little white snakes. Whoosh! The little white snake was obviously extremely sharp. When it saw the flying swords fly out, it immediately retreated back into the rock wall. Hee, after molesting this young master, you want to escape? You really know how to think. Xiaohua sneered. He activated the water-dispelling technique and went to the rock wall. His body swayed and fell into the rock wall, using the earth escape technique. Seeing that Xiaohua could actually escape into the rock wall, those white snakes that had some intelligence were dumbfounded. They were really as anxious as snakes that had lost their homes. They hurriedly fled. However, when Xiaohua escaped into the rock wall, he was also stunned. The rock wall was riddled with holes and there were many thin walls. It was simply several times more than the streets of Sky Patrol City. Once those little white snakes scuttled in, they immediately disappeared without a trace. It's that guy. Xiaohua's divine sense locked onto the little white snake from before. He activated the earth escape technique and chased after it. That little white snake was obviously very familiar with the paths inside the rock wall. Its escape was as smooth as mercury flowing down the ground. Moreover, it often slipped out of a very strange fork in the road when Xiaohua was not paying attention, causing Xiaohua to be somewhat unprepared. Hee. After chasing for a while, Xiaohua's anger had already subsided. It was more important for him to find Xiao Mao's traces. Why would he be angry with this little white snake for no reason? Immediately after, Xiaohua smiled faintly, and his figure flew up. Chapter 2408. But at this moment, woo, a sound like a tiger pouncing and a dragon roaring came from in front of Xiaohua. Although Xiaohua was still inside the rock wall, the sound actually shook the rock wall, and the brilliance around Xiaohua's body flickered a bit. Oh! Xiaohua was shocked. He quickly scanned with his divine sense, and when he saw the situation several hundred feet away, his eyebrows relaxed, and his flying figure turned forward. When Xiaohua came out of the rock wall, he was in the middle of a huge lake. This lake was very different from the previous one. There were only ripples in it, and very little water was gushing out. Only near the center of the lake, there was a fountain that was several hundred feet wide and several hundred feet tall. It was emitting hot steam, and it was continuously gushing out. This fountain had just appeared in the middle of the lake, and the huge sound was the sound of this fountain coming out. It seems, there's nothing strange about it. Xiaohua looked for a moment, and his divine sense and Buddhist sense spread out. Apart from a lot of steam rising, it was clearly much hotter than other places, but he didn't see anything strange. Just as he was about to fly away more than 200 feet to the left of the fountain, woo, another huge sound came, and it was also like a dragon roaring and a tiger roaring. But within the range of several hundred feet, countless bubbles fiercely boiled. Although the range was small, it was almost the same as the power of the sunset island rising from the sea. Another fountain gushed out from the surface of the lake. But this fountain wasn't as tall as the previous one, and it was only several dozen feet. This, following the appearance of the fountain, another wave of biting cold wind rushed into the steaming hot air. However, the hot air was similar to what Xiaohua had seen previously. It did not condense and continued to rush up into the sky. But when the cold wind blew past Xiaohua's face and merged with the steam, Xiaohua actually felt like a willow wind blowing on his face. Solitary yin doesn't give birth, solitary yang doesn't grow. This extremely hot spring water will be accompanied by this extremely cold spring water. Xiaohua only smiled slightly and was about to fly away again, but at this time, the extremely cold spring water gradually turned red. It's a bit strange. Xiaohua's magic power dispersed, and he stared at the spring water again. The red water wasn't much, but it was enough to dye the entire spring water red. The red water droplets sprinkled down from the sky, making the misty lake look a bit strange. But then, there was even more red water, and it was actually very thick, very close to dirty blood. Woo, a light sound came out, and several tattered Taoist robes sprayed out of the ice spring, and the rags fluttered like butterflies. Xiaohua's pupils shrank. Following that, several mutilated corpses were also spat out. They were all broken arms and bones, and they were covered in sword scars. There was even a greenish-white color where the wounds were, as if they had just been cut off. The ice, the spring water, the green, and gradually, the spring, the water, the lake, the ice of the lake, and gradually, of the ice. He of course, and of the Taoist, of the Taoist. Of the ofs, was of. These corpses were wearing ordinary Taoist robes, and he couldn't tell which sect they were from. Moreover, the corpses were all badly damaged and he couldn't tell whether they were male or female, or what age or cultivation they were. These corpses were sprayed out from the ice spring. Although they were unsealed, they must have been frozen underground. Who knows when these cultivators were killed? What was the reason for their deaths? Xiaohua sighed inwardly. I don't know which sect they were from, and no one would know if they died here. Just as he was thinking, Xiaohua's heart stirred. He turned his head and saw that 2 storage pouches had actually flown out of the ice spring. Xiaohua didn't hesitate at all. He waved his hand and the storage pouches that had been thrown high into the air landed in his hand. The storage pouches were in his hand, and the coldness on them was transmitted to Xiaohua's hand. And just as I expected, Xiaohua smiled, and his divine sense entered the storage pouches. It's actually so cold? Seeing that the array in the storage pouches had already collapsed, and everything had disappeared, Xiaohua couldn't help but be shocked by the coldness of the ice spring. Xiaohua casually threw the storage pouch into the lake, and without any hope, he looked at the other storage pouch. Fortunately, although the formation of the storage bag had already collapsed, there was still a corner of the token that was exposed in the collapsed void. Xiaohua hurriedly took out the token. Oh, this is a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Xiaohua was shocked to find that this was actually a token used by the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples. After he immersed his divine sense in it, he found that it was the token of a female cultivator from the Conversion Thunder Palace. A disciple of the Conversion Thunder Palace? Xiaohua naturally thought of the beast cultivators he met before entering the Gale snowfield. Xiaohua didn't have time to clean up the corpses of the Conversion Thunder Palace's disciples who died under the claws of the beast cultivators, and the cultivators he met during this period weren't disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Xiaohua also didn't think of asking others to help him pass this information back to Sky Patrol City. Xiaohua didn't hesitate to take out the command tokens that he'd put into his storage pouch. Sure enough, these command tokens were all the same. However, from the tokens, it couldn't be said that the owners of these two storage pouches came together with the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple. However, since they weren't far away and they were all disciples of the Conversion Thunder Palace, then there was a possibility. To save or not to save? Xiaohua hesitated. He thought of the message from the Conversion Thunder Palace's disciple and knew that a gold core master of the Conversion Thunder Palace was in danger. But if I save this master, then Xiao Mao may not be able to save him? This was the reason for Xiaohua's hesitation. At this time, Xiaohua couldn't help but think of the Phoenix celestial body. Damn it, if I cultivate the Phoenix celestial body to the extreme, it should be able to become a real celestial body. Or the external incarnation technique that the Empress mentioned, then I won't have to hesitate like this. The two of us can go and save the two of us. To save this gold core master? I'm afraid it won't be easy. Xiaohua immediately made a decision. For an intermediate gold core cultivator to be trapped, it must be extremely powerful. I'm afraid I won't be able to help much. Moreover, even if I save it, my background will be exposed, so it's better not to save it. Besides, Xiao Mao is closer to this gold core master than this gold core master. I have no reason not to save my family first. Xiaohua waved his hand and kept the token into the space, then his body flew up. However, he had only flown a few meters, and had just arrived above the ice spring when the ice-cold aura caused Xiaohua to suddenly be shocked. That's not right. I came here to look for Xiao Mao, but I was actually attracted by a Yu He, and even, I was teased by a dozen little white snakes in succession. I actually came here to chase the little white snakes. I also saw the ice spring spurt out, and the ice spring was filled with the corpses of the Conversion Thunder Sect's disciples. If it was another sect's disciple, I wouldn't say anything, but this Conversion Thunder Sect's disciple is obviously related to the Gold Core Master from before, and I haven't sent any information about that master back to Sky Patrol City. Isn't this a series of karma? Could it be? I didn't come here to save Xiao Mao? Instead, I came here to save this master? Chapter 2409. If such obvious karma is placed in front of me, and I turn a blind eye to it, then how can I improve my karma hand? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization, and he didn't hesitate any longer to form the water-dispelling seal and enter the rippling lake water. Xiaohua always felt that the karma hand should be comprehended. However, apart from fusing that wisp of primordial spirit with the karma hand, he had no other method. At this moment, there was a kind of enlightenment in his heart. Perhaps discovering karma and unraveling karma was also a cultivation method, and it was often said that entering the world to gain experience was like this. This lake water was azure, and there were no excessive impurities in the water. Not to mention the white snake, even some seaweed and the like were extremely rare. He could see the bottom at a glance. Xiao Hua urged his magic power, and when he dived down several hundred feet, a powerful force was produced, preventing him from diving down. Xiao Hua understood that he didn't have the water escape technique, and this water-splitting seal was just a trick. Then he swept his divine sense and flew to the stone wall he came from before, and continued to use the earth escape technique to dive down into the lake. Unfortunately, after the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua's earth escape technique had reached its limit, and he couldn't go down anymore. However, looking at the lake water, he still hadn't reached the deepest part. Good, Xiao Hua was really surprised. This lake water is almost deeper than the Guihe Sea, right? The ice and hot springs spurted out from such a deep place. How powerful is that? However, since I can't dive to the bottom of the lake, the Golden Core seniors of the converted Thunder Palace shouldn't have been able to dive so deep, right? Then, where did their corpses come from? Xiao Hua understood after thinking for a bit. There must be a passage under the lake. Then Xiao Hua released his Buddhist sense again. However, his Buddhist sense couldn't go very far under this mountain range. An indescribable heavy pressure was suppressing his Buddhist sense from all directions, and he couldn't extend it far at all. His divine sense was even more impossible. It's really strange. Xiao Hua felt that there weren't any restrictions in this mountain range, and he was somewhat puzzled. Maybe it's the power of heaven and earth? After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua cautiously opened his Dharma eyes. In his Dharma eyes, he saw that the mountain range was completely filled with a faint blue brilliance. This brilliance was somewhat similar to the spiritual energy of the water world, but it was also different. There was a faint murderous pressure. What the hell is this? Xiao Hua used his transcendence vision to observe for a long time, but he still couldn't figure out the situation. He could only close his transcendence vision and ponder again. It's very obvious that this place should be the periphery of this kind of thing. If we go further down, we might come into contact with the core. That core formation master is probably trapped inside. This young master hasn't even seen this thing before, so how can I possibly decipher it? The current Xiao Hua was no longer the previous hothead who dared to go anywhere. Even in the face of danger, he knew how to retreat. Forget it, let's find out where the core formation masters are first. Xiao Hua's figure flew towards the other direction of the lake. It's just that Xiao Hua, who didn't have Buddhist knowledge to rely on, was like an ordinary person on a flat road. He could only take one step at a time, and it was very strenuous to find him. Let's get Little Silver to come out and help. With a wave of his hand, Xiao Hua took Little Silver out of the space. Chirp chirp, there was still half a stalk of spirit grass in the corner of Little Silver's mouth as it looked around in bewilderment. When it saw Xiao Hua in the brilliant light of Earth Escape, realization dawned in its mouse eyes. It chirped, as if it was exasperated that Xiao Hua didn't live up to its expectations. It curled its little tail slightly and wrapped it around Xiao Hua's little finger. Shaking its head, it flew proudly in front of Xiao Hua. Looking at Little Silver's twitching little nose and the increasingly obvious gold strands on it, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Is there anything to be proud of? This is your innate magical ability. How can this old man compare with you? Innate magical ability? That's right. Xiao Hua suddenly sobered up. Damn it, that phone booping can tear the space apart, and see through this young master's cultivation base. All of these are his innate divine abilities. How could that guy be so generous as to let this young master see a jade slip containing a secret technique? It must be some kind of trick to lure the enemy. My goodness, it can tear open space. What kind of spirit bird is that? Xiao Hua was envious again. Little Silver moved very quickly in front. Furthermore, it wasn't going down all the way and even seemed to be going up, so it was naturally easy for Xiao Hua to follow. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up as a small spirit stone vein actually appeared in his field of vision. Little Silver stood proudly on the spirit stone vein, its little tail wagging slightly as it waited for Xiao Hua's praise. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he could only give it a thumbs up as if to praise it. Little Silver was also a little intelligent. It cheerfully scurried up Xiaohua's palm, its little tail curling around Xiaohua's thumb. Its two front paws cupped together and it arched slightly, as if it was showing humility. "All right." Xiaohua waved his hand and put little Silver back into the space, while he stood on the spirit stone vein and pondered. The spirit stone in front of him was a dark blue color, which was the best water-type spirit stone. This was also rare on Dawn Rain Continent. It wasn't easy for little Silver to be able to distinguish it from a distance and bring Xiaohua here. If he let little Silver lead the way again, there would definitely be more spirit stone veins ahead. As for the location of the Golden Core Masters, little Silver might not be able to find them. Take it. What else is there to think about? Xiaohua said to himself. If you don't take the ready-made spirit stones, the heavens won't let you find them next time. Xiaohua then took out the ancient dragon silver and started to chisel. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he had put a lot of spirit stones into the space. However, this was a spirit stone vein after all. Although it was very small, there were still a lot of them. But with Xiaohua alone, it would take a lot of time. That's right, how could this young master forget about these puppets? Xiaohua abruptly stopped and slapped his forehead. Previously at Quanjin Mountain, I was afraid that others would find out. Furthermore, the jade essence was too hard, so this young master had to do it himself. This is a spirit stone vein. Isn't this the time for the puppets to do their work? Then, Xiaohua waved his hand, and numerous puppets were taken out and started to work. Xiaohua clapped his hands and fled in the direction of the spirit stone vein. After fleeing for a while, he saw many caves and tunnels appear before his eyes. He immediately understood that there was a spirit stone vein at the bottom of Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain, and what he had found was only a corner of it. However, after he carefully followed the tunnel and searched for a while, he didn't find any traces of swordsmen or cultivators. There were only a few scattered spirit stones and a few damaged low-grade flying swords that were thrown into the cave. Xiaohua came to a realization. This is the same as Mount Quanjin, an abandoned spirit stone mine. Furthermore, it's a sword cultivator's spirit stone vein. In that case, the Golden Core Masters of my Imperial Thunder sect discovered this spirit stone vein and found the tunnel to enter the vein. But after they entered, they fell into it? Xiaohua scratched his chin and came up with some plausible conclusions. A place that a Golden Core Master could find must have spirit stones, right? Otherwise, why would she go there? Thinking this, Xiaohua could only pull little Silver out of the space again. Looking at little Silver again, he was really angry. Hadn't he just sent him back? Why was he being pulled out again in such a short time? And he still wanted him to rest? Little Silver chirped, looking completely indifferent. Hee, Xiaohua smiled evilly and stretched out his thumb, wiggling it up and down as if he was nodding. Seeing this, little Silver's eyes flashed with a novel expression, and he immediately pounced over, his little tail wrapped around Xiaohua's thumb, his body wiggling up and down as Xiaohua nodded. Chirp, 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 little Silver was happy, and without waiting for Xiaohua to give him any instructions, he darted out of Xiaohua's hand again. He didn't follow the tunnel at all, and directly escaped into the rock wall. Seeing that little Silver didn't hesitate at all, Xiaohua was amused. Needless to say, if it wasn't spirit stones in front of them, then it wasn't anything good. Little Silver's nose was worthy of a spirit-seeking mouse's nose. However, after entering the rock wall, little Silver was a little hesitant. His nose twitched all over the place, not up and down, and the path he escaped in was also crooked. After a meal, little Silver suddenly scuttled down in a straight line. Great! Xiaohua was overjoyed. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, little Silver came to an abrupt stop. His little head turned left and right, and with a whoosh he jumped out of the rock wall. Xiaohua followed, and in front of them was actually a pitch-black tunnel. In the darkness, little Silver's two mouse eyes were abnormally bright. It wasn't until Xiaohua took out the Minghua stone that he could clearly see that this was a one-zhang wide and narrow tunnel. The tunnel was unusually clean, and there were no broken stones or anything like that. Furthermore, there were faint drops of water dripping down the walls of the tunnel, which condensed into water under Xiaohua's feet, and flowed quietly down the tunnel into the depths. What's wrong? Xiaohua looked at Little Silver, who was still in midair, and wondered why it wasn't moving forward. Who would have thought that Little Silver would actually squeak twice, then turn over and lie down in midair with its belly facing up? Its 4 little paws were curled up slightly, and only its little tail was stretched out as straight as a pencil. What are you doing? Xiaohua was quite puzzled, but after a while, Little Silver still didn't move, as if it had lost all signs of life. Xiaohua instantly understood. It turned out that Little Silver was saying that it was too dangerous up ahead, and it didn't dare go forward, or Little Silver was reminding him that there was a life-threatening danger up ahead. Hee, I got it. Get up. As soon as Xiaohua's voice fell, Little Silver stood up with a whoosh. Damn it, when did you understand my voice? Xiaohua asked very strangely. Who would have thought that Little Silver would actually squeak again, and it really was answering Xiaohua's question. Hee, forget it, take me to the place just now. Xiaohua didn't care what Little Silver was saying as he instructed. Squeak, squeak. Little Silver wagged its tail and easily drilled into the rock wall. Chapter 24:10. 2 hours later, Xiaohua returned, but Little Silver had already been put away in his space. Hee, I've gained something again. Xiaohua looked at the dark tunnel. His divine sense couldn't reach far, and the brilliance of the Minghua stone was only several zhang. He flew slowly and laughed in his heart, not to mention the water-type top-grade spirit stone, just understanding that the size and weight of things that can be put into the space is related to the strength of the mind. This young master's trip was not in vain. It turned out that when Xiaohua was mining the spirit stones, he thought the puppets were too slow, so he urged the puppets to separate the spirit stone vein into large pieces and put them into the space with his mind. Who would have thought that spirit stones that were several zhang in size could be put into the space? If it was too big, it couldn't be put into the space. This was completely different from when he easily put the wishful staff and the heavy magic staff into the space. This made him understand that things that could be put into the space were not only related to the weight and size, but also the type of things. If his mind was strong enough, it would be normal for him to put the entire spirit stone vein into his space. He wouldn't have to work so hard to mine it bit by bit. Thinking about bringing the entire mineral vein into his own space, Xiaohua couldn't help but gulp down his saliva. What kind of almighty power was that, and what kind of refreshing feeling was that? All right, let's be careful. Xiaohua restrained his mind and tried his best to look at the tunnel several zhang away. He listened to the gurgling sound of water as he slowly flew forward. There's a mark here. As Xiaohua flew, he saw traces of magic power fluctuations on the left side of the tunnel and hurriedly went over. It should be right, this is the symbol of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Seeing that the symbol was a bolt of lightning, Xiaohua understood and looked behind him. The long tunnel led into the darkness, like a strange beast's mouth slightly open. There must be these symbols in the tunnel. The disciples of my Imperial Thunder Sect must have gone out from here to find help. Then Xiaohua clapped his hands and wanted to take out the cloud-suppressing seal, but then he remembered that it was almost broken in half by Feng Booping and couldn't be used anymore. Now, the only magic weapons he could use were the Yang Leaf Fan and the Soaring Dragon Shears. As for the Soaring Dragon Shears, Xiaohua had already made up his mind that he couldn't use it in this battle, so he could only use the Yang Leaf Fan. However, the Yang Leaf Fan was an offensive magic tool, not a defensive magic tool. Even if Xiaohua held it in his hand, if something unexpected happened, he could still be caught off guard. What other magical treasures do you have? There were a lot of damaged magic weapons in Xiaohua's space, but he had never thought of repairing them. Now, he was in a bit of a predicament. That Xiaodou looks like it can defend. Xiaohua poured out the sword pellet from the small bucket and held the small bucket in his hand. However, the small bucket that had already been refined by the Buddhist fire for so long was still that tattered, without the slightest trace of healing. Moreover, the restriction inside the small bucket was abnormally strong. Even with Xiaohua's current Buddhist sense and spiritual sense, he still couldn't penetrate it. Sigh, what a piece of junk. Xiaohua was helpless. He wanted to throw this thing into the space, but he couldn't bear to. After all, It had been refined in the Buddha fire for so long. Who knew if it would be useful in the future? After Xiaohua once again threw the small bucket into the Buddha fire, he once again stored the sword pellets inside. Only then did he take out the yang leaf fan and hold it in his hand. Forget it, it's better than nothing. Xiaohua always felt that holding something in his hand was the only way to feel at ease. The tunnel was actually very long. Xiaohua didn't dare to fly too fast. He only used ordinary flying techniques to move forward. He saw more than 10 Imperial Thunder Sect symbols, but the tunnel still didn't have an end. What are sword cultivators doing? Why did they dig such a long tunnel for no reason at all? Why didn't they do a job with a bright future like mining? What are they doing here? Xiaohua was really somewhat baffled. Spiritual sense couldn't be used here, so sword cultivators naturally didn't know what was in front of them. Why did they dig such a long tunnel in the spirit stone vein? However, the pitch-black darkness was still the same, but the sound of flowing water was getting louder and louder. From the gurgling sound of a stream to the rumbling sound of a flood, there was actually a feeling of 100 rivers returning to the sea. Another 2 hours passed. Xiaohua didn't know how deep he had flown down the tunnel, but suddenly he felt a kind of enormous suction force in front of him that wanted to suck him in. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hastily urged his magic power, and his whole body flashed with brilliance, holding his body back. Then he looked up again. The edge of the bright flower stone's brilliance was already misty, and the uneven surface of the tunnel could no longer be seen. This is the end of the tunnel. Xiaohua understood. Moreover, this end is still connected to another place. Xiaohua slightly turned his eyes. In a very conspicuous place on his left hand, there was another symbol of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Then Xiaohua slowly flew to the edge of the tunnel, but he saw that the end of the tunnel was a huge abyss. In the abyss, there was a huge gale blowing down from the top. That enormous suction force was caused by the gale. Xiaohua stuck his head out to look at that pitch-black bottomless abyss. On the 4 walls of the abyss, there were countless small streams of water flowing out from the cracks or from the tunnel. They poured onto the protruding rock walls and rolled towards the bottom of the abyss. The sound of the streams converging resounded throughout the entire abyss. Xiaohua threw his hand, and the bright flower stone drew an arc in the air, flashing brilliance, and fell into the abyss. Seeing that brilliance disappear like a meteor, Xiaohua frowned. This abyss seems to be very deep. The Golden Core Stage Master of the Imperial Thunder Sect is trapped below? Hey, are you okay? Xiaohua shouted at the top of his voice, but his voice was pulled down, and there was no echo. The gale in the abyss whistled down, and it was very strong. It tore apart the streams of water, and also tore apart Xiaohua's thoughts. Just this gale alone wasn't difficult for Xiaohua, but the key was that he couldn't use his divine sense, making Xiaohua feel uncertain about the bottom of the abyss. Forget it, since I'm here and the Golden Core Stage Master can go down, this Xiao can naturally also go down. Xiaohua urged his magic power, and the protective brilliance around his body flickered. It was no different from the protective brilliance of a Golden Core Stage cultivator, and he jumped down. Sigh, how good would it be if I had a phoenix Dharma body? Xiaohua's figure was swept down by the gale, and he thought of the Dharma body's wings again. When he stabilized his figure, he leaned against the side of the abyss's rock wall, then he urged his magic power and slowly descended. Xiaohua was abnormally careful, but after descending for more than several hundred zhang, he didn't see anything strange. Everything was extremely normal. The more peaceful it was, the more Xiaohua's heart was apprehensive, and he clenched the sun leaf fan in his hand tightly. The wind blowing from above the abyss is increasingly stronger, and it's also a lot heavier. It's slowly going to exceed the limit of the defense. As Xiaohua fell into the abyss, he gradually discovered the abnormality. Moreover, the bottom of this abyss is even colder, and it's gradually approaching the extreme cold of the ice spring. Let's go down a bit more. If it exceeds the limit of the defense, I'm afraid I'll have to think of another way. Xiaohua didn't have any defensive magic treasures, and he was indeed somewhat stretched, so he thought to himself. Immediately after, he fell for more than several hundred zhang. Xiao Hua felt the pressure around his body increase, and the protective brilliance around his body flickered. Just as he was about to urge his magic power again, suddenly, several dozen large tunnels appeared beside Xiao Hua, and from those tunnels, a strong hurricane blew out. These hurricanes combined with the gale from above the abyss to form a powerful force. Moreover, this unforeseen event was especially sudden, and Xiao Hua was caught off guard, and his entire body lost its balance. With a loud, he rushed down the abyss along with the hurricane. Peng, misfortune never comes alone, and Xiao Hua rapidly fell for several hundred zhang. The pressure within the hurricane in the abyss suddenly increased, and the protective golden light could no longer hold on, and was quickly annihilated. Oh no! Xiao Hua hurriedly urged his magic power again, and his body flickered with brilliance again with great difficulty. Xiao Hua's strength was comparable to a late-stage gold core, but after all, he didn't have a gold core in his body, and most of the divine abilities of gold core cultivators were unable to be used. Of course, it was fortunate that his magic power was deep, and once the protective brilliance was annihilated, he urged it again, and he was still able to stabilize his body with great difficulty. Just when Xiao Hua felt that his body was stable, another hurricane appeared around the rock wall and joined the gale. This time, Xiao Hua was truly unable to stabilize his body, and he did his best to urge his magic power to protect himself. Like a windmill, he spun rapidly and rushed to the bottom of the abyss. Can gold core cultivators still have other methods? Xiao Hua's brain was spinning rapidly like his body. How did they enter this abyss? But at this moment, with a loud pa, water splashed everywhere, and Xiao Hua fell solidly on the abnormally firm rock wall. And the defense that Xiao Hua had just urged his magic power to was instantly destroyed. Damn it, this young master understands. Xiao Hua's body was finally considered to have been tempered countless times, and now it was abnormally firm. Although his entire body was faintly sore, he could still clap his hands and force himself to stand up. This was a huge protrusion that extended from the rock wall, forming a so-called platform. It covered a small half of the abyss, and Xiao Hua fell on it. Presumably, a gold core master also fell here, or else how could this abyss be the end? Xiao Hua stood up, and his body was still resisting the howling gale. However, since there was a platform blocking the gale, the pressure on his body was greatly reduced. Xiao Hua walked around the platform, but didn't see a place that could lead him to the depths of the rock wall. Unconsciously, he came to the edge of the platform, and saw that on the opposite side of the platform, there was a faint brilliance. Although it was blurry, he could still see it clearly. Xiao Hua stretched out his arm, and just as he touched the hurricane with a purr sound, Xiao Hua's arm was immediately sucked back by the hurricane. There's nothing on the platform, then I can only fly to the brilliance on the opposite side. Even if there is an entrance under this platform, I can still see it clearly when I reach the opposite side. This was why Xiao Hua didn't use the lightning escape technique, and instead used the wind escape technique. Sure enough, his body became much more stable in the hurricane. Although the heavy pressure still couldn't be eliminated, it was enough for Xiao Hua to easily fly from the platform to the place where the brilliance came from. Contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, there was actually a 10 zhang long fissure on the opposite cliff. It split the entire cliff in half, and the brilliance was emitted from that fissure. However, the brilliance was still in the depths of the crack, and Xiao Hua still couldn't see it clearly. Moreover, when Xiao Hua's body fell into the crack, he discovered that there was no gale blowing in the crack, no matter if it was blowing in or out. Chapter 24:11. Phew, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the sun leaf fan that he had been holding in his hand flashed with brilliance. A thick fire dragon was born, and it flew toward Xiao Hua several meters in front of him. This was Xiao Hua's casual test, but what made Xiao Hua even more shocked was that the fire dragon only flew a few feet before it immediately dimmed and was annihilated. This place is actually filled with water-type spiritual energy? Xiao Hua hurriedly opened his Dharma eye. Sure enough, the light blue spiritual energy became increasingly dense. It should be this kind of water-type spiritual energy that extinguished the fire dragon of the yang leaf fan. Seeing that the yang leaf fan was useless, Xiaohua waved his hand and ignited the Samadhi true fire. Looking at the pure Samadhi true fire in his palm, Xiaohua had mixed feelings. Although the Samadhi true fire was not extinguished, it was still terrifyingly weak. It swayed and flickered as if it could be blown out by the wind. This was the first time Xiaohua encountered such a situation. It's really a bit strange. The yin-yang twin spring mountain has yin and must also have yang. Even if the water-type spiritual energy is abundant, the fire-type spiritual energy should not be lacking. Xiaohua pondered and put away the yang leaf fan. The Samadhi true fire was also extinguished. He raised his hand and took out the wishful staff. At the crucial moment, a magic tool not of the 5 elements is still useful. Xiaohua waved the staff in his hand. His courage came, but he still did not dare to fly. Instead, he slowly walked towards the crack. The crack was very wide and seemed to cross the entire rock wall. However, Xiaohua knew that the key was still in front. It was a blurry place with only a faint flash of brilliance. And the surroundings of the brilliance were still pitch black. Something's wrong. Suddenly, Xiaohua stopped. Previously, when Xiaohua walked in the tunnel, there were all kinds of sounds like flowing water and whistling wind. But here, there was actually no sound. Only the sound of Xiaohua's footsteps and even the sound of his robe could be heard. All of a sudden, Xiaohua's hair stood on end. Xiaohua stopped. His eyes turned rapidly, and he even opened his Dharma eyes. Fortunately, other than the pitch-black darkness that he could see with his naked eyes, there was only the light blue that he could see in the court. There were no shadows of the ghosts in the Tianmen mountain. Xiaohua thought himself clever and imitated a bird's cry. The sound did not have an echo like in the open mountain, and it did not even seem to travel far. Is it the effect of the water-type heaven and earth's spiritual energy again? Xiaohua scratched his head, somewhat enlightened. Soon after, he used the immortal body bestowment technique, and the water-type heaven and earth spiritual energy was actually absorbed into his body with great difficulty. When he refined it, his true essence actually had a slightly heavy feeling. However, the amount of true essence that could be refined by the spiritual qi was much more than usual. This is a good place to cultivate. Xiaohua sighed, but his footsteps didn't stop. In the time it took to eat a meal, Xiaohua could clearly see that there was a huge rock pillar in front of him. The emerald green brilliance was coming from the protrusions of the rock pillar. Oh, why don't I see anything strange about it? Looking at the huge rock pillar in the distance, Xiaohua was still worried about traps, but seeing that there wasn't any blood or corpses around, he turned his attention to the rock pillar. The rock pillar was probably several thousand zhang wide, blocking the front. Xiaohua's field of vision was also blocked by the 10 zhang crack. However, Xiaohua could already see that the crack had disappeared near the rock pillar. The rock pillar was inside a huge space. Shua! Suddenly, an intense green brilliance flashed from the 200 zhang tall rock pillar, attracting Xiaohua's attention. However, when Xiaohua raised his eyes to look at the green brilliance, the sword light around him suddenly flashed, like the reflection of sunlight on a mirror, dazzling Xiaohua's eyes. Not good, Xiaohua secretly shouted in his heart. Seeing that there were 4 flying swords around him, he hastily flew back. However, it was already too late. The scene around Xiaohua was completely distorted, and the rock pillar, the crack, and the light all disappeared. The 4 flying swords vibrated, and countless sword lights surrounded Xiaohua. In the blink of an eye, Xiaohua was completely surrounded by the sword lights. Following the appearance of the 4 flying swords, the rock wall around Xiaohua completely disappeared, revealing a huge space. In that space, there was an incomparably huge rock pillar standing in the center. It turned out that the sword formation formed by the 4 flying swords relied on the combination of the crack and the rock pillar. When one's attention was focused on the rock pillar, they would involuntarily fall into the sword formation. Even though Xiaohua was already extremely careful, he still fell into the sword cultivator's trap, and was not happy at all. Looking at the sword formation again, there were several corpses within the falling sword lights. Although these corpses were covered in sword wounds, and some of them even had their hearts and lungs pierced, These corpses were perfectly preserved and lifelike. One of them was a female cultivator with grizzled hair and an appearance of a middle-aged woman. Xiaohua only felt his vision blur, and countless sword lights pierced towards him from all directions. Everything in front of him disappeared, and the entire world was only filled with sword lights. High up in the sky, the sword lights were like a riot of falling flowers, each of them painful, each of them dazzling. In his left hand, the sword lights were like raindrops hitting banana leaves, each drop killing gods, each drop suffocating. In his right hand, the sword lights were like autumn leaves drifting, each of them melancholy, each of them sorrowful. Even under his own feet, there were countless whistling sword lights, like gushing flames of anger, piercing straight out. Xiaohua did not hesitate, and the wishful staff in his hand danced. The sky-piercing staff technique was really amazing, and it was really watertight. With a burst of crackling sounds, all the sword lights were shattered, and the spiritual power in Xiaohua's body was urged to fly in one direction. However, Xiaohua's spiritual power was not urged, and once it was urged, a powerful force of imprisonment immediately pressed down from all directions. It simply did not allow Xiaohua to struggle, and all of a sudden, it penetrated his body and imprisoned Xiaohua's true essence. Damn it, what kind of bullshit sword formation is this? Xiaohua was shocked because this force of imprisonment was really fierce. With the strength of late gold core stage, Xiaohua could not struggle. Needless to say, according to Xiaohua's estimation, even if Taoist Jing Ru and other nascent soul stage cultivators came, they would not be able to resist. Fortunately, Xiaohua's strength was not imprisoned by the formation. Waving the wishful staff, Xiaohua was still able to easily knock down all the flying swords. Since he could not fly, Xiaohua could not stop his feet. While waving the wishful staff, he retreated. He would rather fall into the abyss than be trapped in this sword formation. However, Xiaohua's calculations had long fallen into the calculations of the sword cultivator. Xiaohua walked for a while, but his figure did not leave the place for half a minute. Chapter 24:12. In the time it took to eat a meal, Xiaohua's staff shadows surged, tightly protecting his entire body. However, the sword lights seemed to be endless, swarming down like a swarm. They were simply like snowflakes fluttering in the sky. Moreover, with Xiaohua's resistance, the power of the sword light became stronger and stronger. Xiaohua's staff also gradually became heavier. Needless to say, if Xiaohua did not have any special means and only passively defended, even if his divine power was amazing, sooner or later he would be crushed by the increased power and be like the scattered corpses on the ground, pierced by thousands of swords. Xiaohua, who was in the middle of the situation, was naturally anxious. He was clear about the danger. Go! Xiaohua took the time to wave his hand and urged the dragon transformation art. He forcibly urged a trace of spiritual power and took out the Tengjiao shears. The Tengjiao shears flew out and cut towards the distance. Unfortunately, the golden light of the Tengjiao shears cut through a large area of sword light. However, if it wanted to hit the flying swords and break the sword formation, it was still impossible. Just when Xiaohua was free to urge the dragon transformation art, the Tong Tian staff technique had a flaw. Two sword light passed through the gap between the staff shadows and stabbed towards Xiaohua's neck. Grandma, isn't this sword formation too powerful? Xiaohua was shocked. He knew that his skin was rough and his flesh was thick, but he did not dare to be intimate with the sword light. In a hurry, he threw out the Tengjiao shears with his left hand and punched the sword light. Xiaohua's Big Dipper God fist was still powerful. It hit the back of the sword light. After a peng sound, it was followed by a kacha sound. The sword light actually broke like a real flying sword. As for the other sword light, Xiaohua used the ethereal steps and easily dodged it. After dodging the two sword lights, he saw that the Tengjiao shears was like a clay ox entering the sea. Xiaohua waved his hand and the Tengjiao shears returned to the space. There was no longer a trace of spiritual power in his body. Sigh. Xiaohua bit his lip. His brain was spinning rapidly, but what could he do without spiritual power? After thinking for a moment, he waved the wishful steel staff in his right hand and tried to protect his body. With some effort, he opened the Dharma eye in his left hand to see if there were any flaws in the sword array. In his Dharma eye, 4 resplendent sword lights were suspended at the 4 corners of the sword formation. 4 different colored lights flew out from the sword lights and circled around the sword formation. They intertwined with each other and formed a mysterious trajectory as they flew towards Xiaohua. The 4 different colored lights then formed different colored lights, which looked very dazzling. There's someone else in the sword array? Just as Xiaohua was examining the flaws in the sword formation, he suddenly saw a ball of blue light flickering under the blue brilliance of the sword light. However, the brilliance was extremely faint. If Xiaohua hadn't carefully examined it, it would have already passed by. Could it be a gold core stage master of my Imperial Thunder Sect? Xiaohua woke up, so he waved the wishful steel staff while walking towards the blue brilliance. It was strange to say that no matter how Xiaohua flew just now, he could only wander in the same place. Even if he walked, he could not leave half a step. He stared in one direction with his Dharma eye. Although he felt that his body was walking randomly in the sword array, he was getting closer and closer to the blue brilliance. When the blue brilliance was near, Xiaohua could clearly see that it was a fist-sized bead. It emitted a thin brilliance that covered an old woman with gray hair. The old woman's body was full of blood. Her shoulders, chest, and abdomen had deep cracks on her robe. Moreover, on top of this blue brilliance, the same sword light that attacked Xiaohua fell. Every time a sword light fell, the blue brilliance trembled and the brilliance dimmed a little. Looking at the brilliance, he was afraid that it would not last long. "Senior, senior!" Xiaohua shouted anxiously. Although the inside of the sword formation was abnormally dangerous, it was extremely quiet. Numerous sword lights were emitting faint sounds. Xiaohua's voice immediately reached the cultivator's ears. The female cultivator forced herself to open her eyes. Her eyes were abnormally dim, and she looked like she was on the verge of death. However, when she saw Xiaohua's robe, her eyes unconsciously flashed with a strange light. She anxiously said, You are a disciple of my Imperial Thunder Sect? Yes, this junior is a disciple of Thunder Palace who participated in the Sword Cultivator War. My name is Xiaohua. Xiaohua replied while waving the wishful steel staff. Senior, are you Martial Uncle Dui Miaoqing? Yes, this old woman is. Dui Miaoqing's eyes became more spirited. She squeezed out a smile on her face. Could it be that you are the disciple sent by Palace Master Dui? This. Xiaohua hesitated slightly and shook his head. Senior Dui, please know that the disciple you sent to send the message has died in the hands of the Huan country's beast cultivators. This junior was just passing by. However, I only killed those beast cultivators. All the senior brothers were killed. Sigh, Dui Miaoqing immediately understood. You still haven't sent the communication talisman back to the Imperial Thunder Sect? Yes, this disciple was in a hurry. The corpses of the senior brothers and sisters were all in the storage pouch. I didn't have time to organize them, so the communication talisman was naturally not sent out. Xiaohua's face revealed an apologetic expression. You are extremely good. Dui Miaoqing's face revealed a smile. This old woman was still thinking that my corpse would be left behind in the foreign territory. Now that I have met Martial Nephew, I have someone to rely on. After this old woman dies, I ask Martial Nephew to bring this old woman's corpse back to Imperial Thunder Palace. Martial Uncle, please don't say such disheartening words. This disciple still has to rely on Martial Uncle's divine ability to break the array. Xiaohua said anxiously. Dui Miaoqing looked at the injuries all over her body, then looked at the thin brilliance. She shook her head and said, This old woman's injuries are very serious. Even pills can't heal them. The time has been delayed for too long. If not for my persistence, I would have died long ago. The magic power of this misty-tide bead is also about to be exhausted. In a few more moments, this old woman will be killed by the sword. Xiaohua quickly walked in front of Dui Miaoqing and silently chanted the word, grow, in his heart. The wishful staff grew to about 3 feet. It danced in front of Dui Miaoqing to protect her, helping to block the sword light that fell in front of her. Xiaohua, this magic staff of yours is actually a strange object, Dui Miaoqing said in a low voice. This old woman fell into the sword array. Even after using many magic treasures, I still couldn't block it. In the end, I had to use the Misty Tide bead to barely block it. However, if I only rely on this magic staff to block the sword light, I won't be able to break the sword array. I'm afraid that in the end, I won't be able to escape. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and replied, Junior knows. Junior is preparing to go under the flying sword that's setting up the formation and see if I can knock it down. You can see the flying sword array? Dui Miaoqing was a bit shocked. This great array is really to restrict cultivators like me. All of my divine sense and magic power can't be used. I'm afraid that cultivators won't be able to break the array unless they have a sword array or other means. This junior has a secret technique that can see the flying sword array. Xiaohua said without hesitation. Senior, please wait a moment. This junior will be back soon. Dui Miaoqing nodded slightly, a trace of hope appearing on her face. But at this moment, a sharp sword light streaked across the sword array, piercing through Dui Miaoqing's body defense and stabbing into her chest. Dui Miaoqing felt pain and said anxiously, why did this sword light suddenly become sharps? Xiaohua suddenly realized that it was because of his arrival that the sword array's power increased, right? But without waiting for him to speak, Dui Miaoqing hurriedly said, Xiaohua, I'm afraid this old woman won't live for long. This time, I came to the Gale Snowfield to investigate the cause of death of my Dui Hui from Dui Lei Palace. This old woman found Dui Hui's message not far from the Gale Snowfield. It seemed that she was aware of some secret of sword cultivators, so she took the risk to come here. As soon as this old woman entered the tunnel of the mineral vein, I felt that something was amiss, so I first sent my disciples back to send a message. This old woman entered alone. But this old woman still fell into the sword cultivator's trap. You must break out of this sword array and send this news back to the Imperial Thunder Sect or the Sky Patrol City. Tell them that this place is related to the outcome of the battle between sword cultivators and that they must come here to investigate carefully. In addition, Xiaohua, your cultivation base is enough. Don't go any further. Ahead will definitely involve the great secret of sword cultivators, and the sword array will definitely be more powerful. Remember. At this point, Dui Miaoqing's face flushed red. It was obviously the final radiance of the setting sun. She pointed her finger at the tide bead above her head and smiled bitterly. This old woman is considered an anomaly in the Imperial Thunder Sect. I actually have a water attribute physique. If it weren't for the surname Dui, I would have been expelled from the sect long ago. Therefore, this old woman's magic weapons and cultivation methods are not passed down in the sect. Send this old woman's body back to the sect, and these cultivation methods and magic weapons and other things will be left to you. You can also find a fated person on the Xiaoyu continent to give them to. After speaking, Dui Miaoqing's face actually showed a trace of a smile, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. The tide bead above her head suddenly converged and fell on her chest. Senior, when he heard Dui Miaoqing say that she had a rare water attribute physique in the Imperial Thunder Sect, Xiaohua was slightly stunned. When he saw the smile on her face, Xiaohua's heart became miserable again. The Imperial Thunder Sect was full of thunder and fire attributes. A water attribute woman actually cultivated to the middle stage of Gold Core. The hardships she faced were obvious. Moreover, going to Huan country to investigate the cause of Dui Hui's death was such a difficult and dangerous task, yet they sent a female cultivator instead of a male cultivator. This was probably a burden for Dui Miaoqing. At this time, she gave the heavy responsibility to Xiaohua. It was a kind of relief. Others might not understand Dui Miaoqing's difficulties, but Xiaohua felt the same way and felt endless sympathy in his heart. He had only just entered the Foundation establishment realm, yet he was being scolded like this. And this was because Dui Miaoqing didn't know that he had already converted to an earth attribute physique. If she knew, who knew what would happen, however, It was useless for Xiaohua to call out again. The tide bead was Dui Miaoqing's life source magic weapon. Dui Miaoqing's life force was already gone, so the tide bead lost its connection with her primordial spirit and fell from the sky. AI, she's also a pitiful person. Even though Xiaohua didn't know how difficult Dui Miaoqing's life as a gold core cultivator was, just based on the fact that all her inheritance was given to Xiaohua after her death, his heart was filled with sorrow. Chapter 24:13. Dui Miaoqing had fallen, but her corpse could be easily sent into the space. Xiaohua even received the tide bead, and then he waved the wishful steel staff and walked towards the closest flying sword. But when he reached the flying sword, Xiaohua was dumbfounded again. The flying sword was hanging high above. Even if he stretched the wishful steel staff to its maximum length, he still couldn't reach it. Now that he couldn't fly, how could he do it? Xiaohua thought a little and used the ethereal steps. The light body technique was now in effect. Although it was not high, it could still be barely reached in his eyes. Just as Xiaohua waved the wishful steel staff and took out the magic wand to hit the flying sword suddenly jumped up and then shook. A flying sword fell from the flying sword and stabbed straight at Xiaohua's forehead. "Grandma, this trick also won't work." Xiaohua cursed and casually hit the flying sword with the wishful steel staff. With a dang sound, the flying sword was not broken. It only shook slightly and broke into Xiaohua's body. Not good. Xiaohua's heart jumped. His right hand didn't have time to clench into a fist, so he had to open his mouth and release the execution dream. With a dang sound, it hit the tip of the flying sword. Sparks splashed and the flying sword was shocked into several pieces. However, these several pieces once again turned into several sword lights and continued to stab towards Xiaohua without mercy. Separate, Xiaohua hurriedly urged the flying sword, and the execution dream immediately turned into several, facing the several sword lights. Finally, all the sword lights were destroyed. "Grandma," Xiaohua breathed a sigh of relief, and his forehead was really sweating. "Oh, it's a little weird." Xiaohua suddenly realized something at this time. All the spiritual sense in the sword array was imprisoned, and he couldn't use any spells at all. But how could he use his spiritual sense to drive the flying sword? Didn't Martial Uncle Dui say that? Only the magical powers of sword cultivators can be used here. The magical powers of other cultivators are restricted. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and he finally thought of a way to escape. However, since he was confident, he opened his Dharma eyes slightly and walked out of the sword formation. He wanted to see if he could walk out of the sword formation. However, when he had only taken a few steps away from the flying sword, an incomparably sharp sword chi blocked his way. That sword chi was light blue in his Dharma eyes, like a wall. Although Xiaohua had yet to approach, that sharp sword chi had already cut through his Taoist robe. Xiaohua had no doubt that if he were to force his way through, even if he had tempered his body for a long time, he would still be cut into pieces by this sword chi. Forget it. If that's the case, I can only use my sword formation to counter your sword formation. Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He slowly walked back to the center of the sword formation, and with a wave of his hand, the sword pouch flew out. "Rise." Xiaohua pointed with his finger, and his primordial spirit used the sword pouch's method of using it. Keng keng. 7 consecutive sword cries rang out, and the flying swords of Ling Yunwu and the others flew out from the sword pouch. When the 7 flying swords flew out, they immediately flashed with 7 resplendent lights inside the sword formation, illuminating the area around Xiaohua. Within the light, the flying swords also fiercely trembled. Keng. They emitted faint sword cries, and these sword cries became increasingly deep and powerful. In the end, the 4 flying swords in the formation also emitted faint sword cries. Wu, the 7 flying swords fell into the sword formation, and very naturally, they arranged themselves according to the sword pouch's formation, forming the appearance of the 7 stars formation. A faintly discernible sword intent was emitted from the sword tip, covering Xiaohua from head to toe. Inside the 7 stars formation, All the sword lights fell into the boiling water like snowflakes and disappeared without a trace. What made Xiaohua even more happy was that the sword lights outside the Seven Stars formation also stopped and no longer fell into the Seven Stars formation. Great! Xiaohua let out a long breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although the wishful staff didn't dance, it was still in his hand to deal with any accidents. After resting for a moment, Xiaohua walked out of the Great Array, and the Seven Stars Great Array moved along with him. Fortunately, the incomparably sharp edges of the sword array were considered nothing within the Seven Stars Great Array. Xiaohua very easily escaped from the sword array surrounded by the 4 flying swords. When Xiaohua came out of the sword formation, the 4 flying swords began to slowly vibrate, and it seemed like they were going to hide in the stone wall. In the space of several dozen feet, the illusion of the stone wall appeared again. Oh, this is Martial Uncle Dui Hui. Xiaohua's gaze swept over and saw the lifelike corpse of the female cultivator. Her Taoist robe was similar to Dui Miaoqing's. Xiaohua drove the 7 stars formation and walked over, storing the several corpses into the space, and then he immediately activated the sword formation. In just a moment, everything returned to its original state. In front of Xiaohua's eyes was a huge dome. Below the dome was the 1,000-meter-tall rock pillar that he had seen before. The bottom of the rock pillar was extremely deep, like a huge spindle reaching into the depths of the rock abyss. Is there a big secret of sword cultivators here? Xiaohua looked around the rock pillar. It seemed that there were cracks all around, and those cracks had faintly disappeared just now. In other words, the rock pillar was surrounded by the sword formation laid out by the 4 flying swords. No matter which direction you came from, you had to pass through the sword formation in order to reach the rock pillar. If someone said that there was no big secret inside the rock pillar, even if you beat him to death, he wouldn't believe it. But what kind of secret was inside the rock pillar? Of course, Xiaohua wasn't in the mood to investigate at this time, because Dui Miaoqing had already said that this sword formation couldn't be resisted by a middle-stage golden core cultivator, so it must have been set up by a swordsman. Xiaohua boasted that he wasn't interested in a secret that could be valued by a swordsman. His task was to bring Dui Miaoqing's message and Dui Hui's suspicion back to Sky Patrol City. His task didn't include finding out the secret. That was something a nascent soul cultivator had to do. Xiaohua and Xiaomao had to save them. As soon as he turned around, Xiaohua prepared to escape into the rock wall. He understood that this place was already deep under the lake, and the force inside the rock wall was very strong. As long as he didn't resist, he would definitely be sent to the surface. However, just as Xiaohua turned around, a feeling of reluctance came from the bottom of his heart. Oh! Xiaohua was stunned. Puzzled, he stopped and slowly turned around. When he faced the rock pillar, that indescribable feeling had already disappeared. When Xiaohua turned around again, that feeling didn't appear again. Strange. Xiaohua scratched his head. He really couldn't think of this so-called key secret of the Sword Cultivator War. What did it have to do with him? Could it be that he participated in the Sword Cultivator War with the mission to stop the swordsman's conspiracy? Was he born to end the Dao Cultivator War? Damn it, forget it. A group of Golden Core cultivators used the lives of many Foundation Establishment cultivators and Qi Refinement cultivators to train themselves. The illusory sword swordsmen also used the lives of a group of bright sword swordsmen and nurturing sword swordsmen to train themselves. Behind them are nascent soul cultivators and swordsmen. None of them are people that I can provoke. Thinking about the swordsmen of Chicken Crow Mountain, who split a large mountain with one sword, if I expose their secret, won't they chase me all over the Dawn Rain continent? It's already difficult for me to deal with Taoist Jing Si, let alone a few more swordsmen. Xiaohua had just seen Feng Buping's power and was very afraid of the swordsman. He turned around and was about to leave, but after taking 2 steps, another kind of understanding was born in his mind. What was wrong? Xiaohua stopped, his gaze somewhat deep. He used his hand to pinch his chin and turned to look at the stone pillar. I had a feeling of karma when I came to the Great Array of Quanjin Mountain. Originally, I thought I was going to send a message to the Imperial Thunder Sect's elders that I was safe. But after I met Li Zongbao, I thought I was going to send a message to Fairy Hong Xia that I was safe. But after I came to the Gale Snowfield, I thought I was going to save Xiao Mao. But after I arrived at the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain Spirit Stone Vein, I thought I was going to save Dui Miaoqing. But now, I finally realized that I came here to expose this huge secret of the sword cultivators. All the karma is pushing me to stop the war and save the lives of thousands of cultivators. Since the hand of karma has such an arrangement, I will also fight with my life. The corner of Xiao Hua's mouth raised a trace of a smile. It's not like I haven't been chased by a nascent soul cultivator before. So what if there are a few more swordsmen? If they have the ability, then catch up to me first. In an instant, Xiao Hua's heroic spirit soared to the sky. That lofty ambition was like a torrential river, as if he could seize the moon in the sky and capture the dragon in the sea at any time. With a wave of his hand, he took out the wishful staff that he had stored in his space. Xiao Hua steadily walked in front of the stone pillar and sized it up again. After looking for a long time, he didn't feel anything special, so Xiao Hua opened his transcendence vision again. Hiss! Seeing the situation of the stone pillar in his transcendence vision, Xiao Hua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The whole stone pillar looked like a spindle, with two sharp ends and a bulge in the middle. And where the bulge was, there was a steady stream of light blue brilliance. This brilliance flew to two parts. One part rushed to the top of the spindle and gathered at the sharp end. The sharp end had a faint fiery red color, which seemed brilliant and obscure. The other part rushed to the bottom of the spindle and also gathered at the sharp end, but the sharp end had a faint emerald color, which was bright and obscure. Yinyang Two Springs Mountain. Yinyang Two Poles. Seeing these two different points and brilliance, he immediately thought of the two poles of magnetism that he had seen before in the dark secret ground. Isn't this spindle similar to the magnetism? This is the core of the Two Springs Mountain. Xiao Hua secretly nodded. I reckon that the sword cultivators were originally mining here, and then they dug a tunnel from the vein to this abyss. And through this abyss, the swordsman found the core of the Two Springs Mountain. That crack might be the work of the swordsman. Chapter 24:14. But what secret is there in this place? What is the key that will affect the sword battle? Xiao Hua looked at the blue brilliance that was pouring down like a waterfall before his eyes. He searched everywhere he knew, but he couldn't find anything strange. I'm afraid I have to go in and take a look. Xiao Hua closed his Dharma eyes, activated his flying technique, and flew towards the stone pillar. Who would have thought that just as his figure entered the abyss of the stone pillar, a kind of heavy pressure from all directions squeezed over. Hiss! Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He activated the Dharma power in his meridians, and the brilliance around his body flashed repeatedly, trying to resist this mountain-like heavy pressure. However, the more he activated his Dharma power, the stronger the pressure became. Even when Xiao Hua activated the immortal body bestowment technique, he absorbed the light blue spiritual energy of heaven and earth while using his Dharma power. The pressure also rose steadily. It can't be! Seeing that his Dharma power had reached the limit, the pressure was still increasing. Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbfounded. According to this trend, in a few more breaths of time, he would be crushed into a meat patty by this pressure. Buzz! Xiao Hua had no choice but to activate the dragon transformation art to the limit again, and the Dharma power that far surpassed the late gold core stage surged out. Impossible! Xiao Hua himself didn't dare to believe that the pressure was pressing him to death, and the light around his body had already dimmed. Even if it is a swordsman who transformed into a sword, their Dharma power, damn it, this young master misunderstood again. Xiao Hua thought of the Dharma power of a swordsman and unconsciously realized something. He hurriedly reduced his Dharma power, and as expected, the pressure also decreased along with his Dharma power. Of course, the pressure didn't disappear because of the disappearance of Xiao Hua's protective light. It even weakened to a certain extent, and then increased again. However, with the strength of Xiao Hua's body, it was more than enough. Alas, there are many dangerous places in this world that test the body. Those Dharma power, divine sense, and so on are all limited. Xiao Hua sighed in relief, and once again wiped the cold sweat on his head. He muttered to himself, but without Dharma power and divine sense, it is impossible to reach these dangerous places. The heavenly Tao is unpredictable. Following which, Xiao Hua flew slowly. He tried to use as little magic power as possible and used more ethereal steps to slowly approach the stone pillar. Although the rock pillar looked very calm, when Xiao Hua approached it, a powerful force pulled Xiao Hua straight up, as if it was being pushed by a huge stream of water. Xiao Hua had seen the light blue brilliance before, so he knew that it was because the brilliance was pouring down. Therefore, he retreated a bit and flew towards the center of the spindle. Sure enough, the tearing force gradually weakened. When Xiao Hua arrived at the depths of the abyss, he was in the middle of the stone pillar. The enormous force was indeed in a kind of relative equilibrium. Xiao Hua closed his eyes and carefully tasted the two different tearing forces as he gradually flew closer to the rock wall. Xiao Hua's upper body gradually emitted a fluttering sound. His hair also straightened up. Xiao Hua's lower body also emitted a fluttering sound, but his entire Taoist robe was facing down. As Xiao Hua got closer, the two forces became increasingly stronger. Although they were balanced, they actually had a tendency to split Xiao Hua into two. Fortunately, this young master has been diligently tempering his bones and refining his body for the past few decades, so I can withstand this kind of tearing force that is rarely seen in the world. Xiao Hua said with a smile as he felt the faint pain in his flesh and bones. Of course, Xiao Hua stopped when he was about 10 zhang away from the stone pillar and opened his transcendence vision again. What he saw with his transcendence vision was that the two different lights were strangely separated in the middle. Each of them formed a kind of arc, and the part in the middle was about the size of a fist and actually emitted a cyan color. A cyan color that was as bright as water. After looking for a long time, Xiao Hua didn't gain anything. He slowly moved again, and while maintaining his balance, he circled around the stone pillar. This stone pillar was really big, at least 1,000 zhang. Xiao Hua didn't dare to move too fast, so it took him more than 2 hours to reach the other side. And this was only half of the stone pillar. It's here. When Xiao Hua patiently saw a small fist-sized hole in the middle of the cyan color, he immediately came to a realization. This is so similar to that Chicken Crow Mountains. Innate gold essence. Could it be, there's an innate gold essence inside? Xiao Hua's eyes widened. Whenever a heavenly treasure appeared, he would be especially spirited. However, it's definitely not some innate gold essence. If it's some innate object, it should be. Yes, an innate jellyfish. Xiao Hua immediately understood. Damn it, this is the thing that the 3 elders of the Blazing Fire Mountain have been looking for. It actually appeared here? Didn't that adept Blue Feather say that he had some clues? Could it be that he also knows about this place? However, if Adept Blue Feather knew about this place, he would have come here long ago. Why would he wait until today? Sword cultivators also tampered with the innate gold essence. They must be tempering their bullshit flying swords, right? That Tai Cyan light can temper flying swords, making them incomparably sharp. How can this innate water chi temper flying swords? What special effects do flying swords have? Since there's a flying sword tempered by a sword cultivator right in front of me, how can this young master not take it? If it's taken into this young master's space, even if the heavenly emperor comes, this young master won't admit it. Xiao Hua's eyes twinkled with the brilliance of spirit stones. It's this fist-sized hole again. Xiao Hua's lips curled into a smile. Needless to say, this huge spindle must be condensed from innate water chi. No matter what kind of divine sense or sword chi, it won't be able to pass through. Only this one of the Dian number can pass through. However, aside from this young master's transformation technique, which cultivator can easily pass through this hole? According to this young master's thoughts, I'm afraid that even the nascent soul of a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't dare to enter, right? Xiao Hua laughed heartily. His body strangely twisted like a fried dough twist. Soon after, his body fell horizontally. However, The two forces from above and below actually stretched Xiaohua horizontally. After several struggles, Xiaohua finally charged into the fist-sized hole like a noodle. When Xiaohua entered the several dozen zhang space, before his eyes was a boundless blue wave. This blue wave not only filled the heaven and earth, it also filled Xiaohua. Moreover, within this blue wave, there were numerous seemingly large but not large, seemingly small but not small, seemingly omnipresent small bubbles continuously gushing out. Just as Xiaohua's gaze came into contact with those bubbles, his eyes blurred and he immediately lost his primordial spirit. Chapter 24:15. At the same time Xiaohua was lost, the surrounding water bubbles rushed over and quickly wrapped around Xiaohua. Those water bubbles began to collide with each other, and slowly, a water bubble as big as Xiaohua gradually formed. Needless to say, from the great shielding power of the water bubble, as long as this water bubble was formed, the inside of the bubble would become a sealed space. In this sealed space, divine sense could not penetrate, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth could not penetrate. Perhaps Xiaohua's fate was to become one with the innate water vapor. At this moment, a dragon's roar came from the middle of the blue water. The dragon's roar was both happy and sad, but at this time, it was more anxious. Little White. Xiaohua's primordial spirit was lost somewhere, but when he heard this dragon's roar, it was so familiar. On that bloodthirsty night, on the night that changed Xiaohua's fate and Shang Huaming's fate, Little White also cried out like this. This cry was deeply engraved in Xiaohua's soul. In an instant, Xiaohua's primordial spirit struggled, and the understanding of Tianmen Mountain's Huang Yi gave Xiaohua endless help. The pain, the loneliness, the helplessness and the bondage of time seemed to have given Xiaohua's primordial spirit wings. His primordial spirit passed through many different illusions like a white horse and suddenly returned to his body. When Xiaohua woke up and saw the situation around him, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat again. Innate true water. Melting everything into water. Such a sentence appeared in Xiaohua's mind. Xiaohua took out the wishful steel rod without hesitation and waved it wildly. Sure enough, it was worthy of being an innate weapon that was not in the 5 elements. The seemingly unstoppable innate true water was actually beaten back by the wishful steel rod, forming a very small space in front of Xiaohua. Little White, Xiaohua shouted. He closed his eyes tightly and opened his Dharma eyes. In the deepest part of the vast ocean, there was a place that was as bright as a jade pearl. Below the jade pearl, there was a sword light that was like jade water. It was unusually dazzling. That's it. Although there were no more Little White's dragon roars, Xiaohua already knew that the soul of the escaping Little White dragon was near the jade pearl. Strangely enough, Xiaohua couldn't fly at all in this innate primordial water. He could only step on it step by step as he walked forward. The sound of waves could be heard as a boundless force pressed down from the front of Xiaohua, forcing Xiaohua to take a few steps back. On the contrary, when Xiaohua was retreating, there was also a huge force blocking him. Only Xiaohua could stand still and let the innate primordial water bubble up to him without any pressure. Xiaohua's Little White dragon hissed weakly. His heart had been anxious for a long time. Seeing the pressure of the innate primordial water, he was also angry. With a cold snort, he waved the wishful staff towards the pressure in front of him. Fight! Sure enough, the heavy pressure was actually defeated by him. Then, Xiaohua quickly stepped forward. In this way, Xiaohua brandished the wishful steel staff to block the innate real water, and at the same time hit the pressure that was invisible to the naked eye and approached the location of the jade pearl. Although Xiaohua's eyes couldn't open, the scene of the jade pearl was deeply imprinted in his mind. He saw that there was a space of about 10 feet, and there was no innate primordial water in this space. In the center of this space, there was a bright spot the size of a thumb. This bright brilliance revolved around a blue light spot that was much smaller than a mung bean. The endless pure blue color was born from this blue light spot. This pure blue brilliance shot out about 5 feet, rushed into the innate primordial water, and each brilliance could produce a bubble. In this pure blue light spot, there were also strands of green brilliance shooting out. As soon as these green brilliance shot out, it was immediately absorbed by a flying sword a few feet below the blue brilliance. And under this flying sword, there was a rotating sword array, with a radius of a few feet. Through the countless palm-sized flying swords in the sword array, Xiaohua saw a small white dragon that was only a few feet in size struggling in pain. Because at every moment, there was a small flying sword piercing into its body. Although no blood flowed out, the small white dragon would twitch a little, and the shadow on its body would dim a little. Moreover, there seemed to be a rotating vortex above the sword array, which was pointing at the flying sword. While the small white dragon was struggling in pain, it also had to resist the attractive force of the sword array. But Tai Wei green light? Xiaohua's eyes swept over the green light, and his mind reacted very naturally. He knew that this Tai Wei green light was the same as the Tai Yi green light. They were both innate objects, but one was innate gold qi, and the other was innate water qi. However, his eyes only swept over the green light, and his gaze directly fell on the flying sword. The flying swords were very ordinary. Even the flying swords he saw didn't seem to be anything special. However, Xiaohua knew that this thing was absolutely not ordinary. Even if it's not ordinary, so what? Even if it's used by a swordsman, so what? Xiaohua did not hesitate to cover it with his hand, and the universe creator covered it. Who knew that just as Xiaohua's Taoist robe covered it, the flying sword shook slightly, and a brilliant blue sword light was born from the flying sword. With a schwa sound, it was faster than lightning, and stabbed at Xiaohua's Taoist robe. Gotcha! Xiaohua's heaven and earth sleeve met the sword light with a metallic sound. A strong force that Xiaohua could not describe, and a kind of sharpness that Xiaohua's universe creator could not resist came from the sword light. Xiaohua's Taoist robe was immediately pierced by the sword light, and Xiaohua's arm was incomparably high. The broken sleeve was like a butterfly fluttering around, and these butterflies fell into a bubble not far away and disappeared in a flash. It was unknown whether it was the butterflies in other people's dreams. Hiss, Xiaohua took a breath, gritted his teeth, and said angrily, "Don't say that you're a flying sword. Even if you're a swordsman today, I will still beat you until you vomit blood." With that said, Xiaohua's bare arms picked up the wishful steel staff with both hands and hit the flying sword with a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. The flying sword was also powerful. With a slight vibration, several sword lights flew out and blocked the wishful steel staff. The sword lights were so sharp and so powerful that every time Xiaohua's wishful steel staff was swung away, causing Xiaohua's qi and blood to surge. Hit, Xiaohua had never been so overbearing. The heavenly staff technique was displayed, and the wishful steel staff was like a continuous raindrop, hitting the flying sword. Finally, the flying sword that no one commanded was hit by Xiaohua's wishful steel staff. With a loud dang sound, a layer of blue brilliance rippled above the flying sword, and the whole flying sword was shocked by the wishful steel staff. Since there was a first time, there was a second time, and a third time. Xiaohua was like a blacksmith, picking up the wishful steel staff and hitting the flying sword with a ding-dang-dang sound. However, contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, he hit the flying sword dozens of times. His hands and feet were a little weak, but the flying sword was still rippling with blue brilliance, and there was no damage at all. Even the sword array below it did not change. Seeing the blue light fall on the flying sword again, Xiaohua smiled bitterly. "Grandma, I thought that the sword array was not easy to break, so I had to start with the flying sword. I did not expect this flying sword to be so powerful. It is worthy of being a flying sword tempered by the blue light. I am afraid that this flying sword can only be used by a swordsman. Humph, in that case, I will also take drastic measures to deal with you." Xiaohua gritted his teeth and released his mind. He was about to collect the innate jellyfish like the innate mother of gold. Who knew that when his mind came in contact with the innate jellyfish, the endless water light overflowed in his mind, and there was an endless illusion that wanted to lead his mind into it. Xiaohua was shocked, and he was almost scared out of his wits. He hurriedly collected his mind, and his body was once again covered in cold sweat. No wonder the swordsman did not dare to accept this innate jellyfish. It is much more powerful than the innate mother of gold. Xiaohua thought with lingering fear. Roar, the little white dragon in the sword array seemed to be aware of Xiaohua's trembling. It also let out a sad roar, and its whole body curled up, and its head was tightly tucked into its body. It seemed to have given up resistance, and let Xiaohua escape. How can this be? Xiaohua's heart was filled with sorrow. Little White was his first playmate in the Xiaoyu continent, and Little White also gave him Longyu. It was really good to him. How could he watch as Little White's soul dissipated between heaven and earth? Moreover, the blue light sword obviously wanted to refine Little White into a sword spirit. This blue light sword must be used to kill a swordsman, and maybe Xiaohua himself would also suffer. I'm afraid I can only use this method. If it doesn't work, this young master. Xiaohua sighed slightly. This young master said a few words, but he could not say anything more. In front of absolute power, all words were nothing. Pooh! Xiaohua opened his mouth slightly, and a stream of cold flame was spat out. However, the moment this cold flame touched the light blue brilliance, it was reflected blue, and then melted. It was still blue brilliance. Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He was just testing the waters. Soon after, he opened his mouth slightly and the scarlet-red spiritual fire flew out like a thread, slowly shooting towards the blue light spot. See, the spirit fire's thread passed through the light blue brilliance, as if it had nothing to do with it. Although Xiaohua's eyes were closed, everything was reflected in his mind, and his heart was filled with slight expectation. As expected, the spirit fire did not disappoint him, and without any obstruction, it reached the side of the innate mother of gold. Xiaohua was overjoyed. He used the fire manipulation art, and the spirit fire nimbly wrapped the innate mother of gold. All the innate primordial water and the blue light were wrapped in the spirit fire. Wang, the flying sword, let out a sorrowful cry, as if it sensed something wrong. Chapter 24:16. Xiaohua didn't care how much it was. He released his mind and wrapped the spiritual fire, taking it along with the innate jellyfish into the space. The innate jellyfish that entered the space was the same as the innate gold jellyfish from before. They were all well-behaved, without any abnormalities. Good. Xiaohua laughed heartily. The flying sword let out a mournful cry. Suddenly, a dazzling blue sword light flashed. The flying sword turned into a rainbow and rushed toward the fist-sized hole. The sword array under the flying sword also followed. Whitey's soul was caught in the sword array and was forced to fly out. Want to leave? No way. Xiaohua shouted. He did so much and took such a big risk. Wasn't it just to save little white soul? With a wave of his hand, the heaven and earth sleeve was unleashed. The sword array that imprisoned Little White was under Xiaohua's hand. This time, Xiaohua urged all the magic power in his body. Sure enough, the flying sword rushed through Xiaohua's arm, and the sword array under the flying sword was grabbed by Xiaohua's bare arm, on the verge of collapse. Ka! A sword light flew out from the flying sword and slashed toward Xiaohua's arm. Xiaohua naturally didn't dare to be negligent. He waved the wishful staff and hit the sword light. Gotcha! The sword light was smashed into thousands of fragments. However, the fragments fell on Xiaohua's arm. Shwa shwa shwa. The fragmented sword light fell like snowflakes, but every crystal sword light slashed across Xiaohua's arm, leaving a scar. This Tai Wei Cyan light sword was actually so powerful. Xiaohua's body, which had been tempered before, was still cut open by its broken sword light. Suddenly, a stream of blood flowed out from Xiaohua's arm, dripping down his arm. Xiaohua's physical body hadn't been injured for a long time. He originally thought he could endure this simple sword wound, but when the sharp edge in his flesh seemed to pierce his soul, a numbing sensation that seemed to penetrate deep into his bone marrow transmitted over, he couldn't help but groan. Even his arm faintly trembled, and the magic power in his arm seemed to be on the verge of collapse. How could the Supreme Light Sword be an ordinary flying sword? The wound caused by the sword light was faintly flashing with a light blue color. That blue color was gradually corroding Xiaohua's skin and flesh, gradually enlarging the wound. It even had a tendency to penetrate deep into Xiaohua's heart. Perhaps Xiaohua's only option now was to release the sword array, or perhaps Xiaohua's only option now was to quickly consume a pill to prevent the Supreme Light's invasion. But Xiaohua, can he let go? He will definitely not let go of Xiaohua. Even though the flying sword flew another few feet, the sword formation was still struggling in Xiaohua's hand. The flying sword vibrated again, and an even thicker sword gleam flashed out. This sword gleam was extremely ferocious, and the flying sword must have realized that it was about to fly into a rage out of humiliation. "Where are you grabbing?" Xiaohua knew that his arm was in trouble, but seeing that he was determined, he stretched out his wishful staff and blocked the sword light. At the same time, he struck out horizontally, wanting to borrow the strength of the sword light to send it flying, but at this moment, the sword light suddenly tilted and split into two. One pierced the sword array, and the other pierced Xiaohua's chest. "Grandma, is this still a flying sword?" Xiaohua was extremely shocked. At this time, he could only choose one, either use the wishful staff to break the flying sword that was piercing the sword array, or block the flying sword that was piercing himself. He had no third choice. For Xiaohua, he only had one choice. He waved his hand, and the wishful staff hit the flying sword that was piercing the sword array, but at this moment, a sudden change occurred. As early as when Xiaohua's arm was bleeding, the drops of blood fell into the sword array, and dripped on the soul of the little white dragon that had already dimmed to the extreme. Within the bright red drops of blood, the trace of gold gradually penetrated, and the soul of the little white dragon gradually emitted a faint brilliance. However, this brilliance was too weak, and Xiaohua, who was at the brink of life and death, did not notice it at all. Roar! With a dragon's roar, an extremely brilliant brilliance was born from the sword array. The little white dragon within the sword array suddenly roared and swam rapidly. As it swam, its body turned into a shadow and crashed into a part of the sword array. The flying sword that was piercing the sword array also stopped at this time, and it seemed that it could not find the trace of the little white dragon. Xiaohua was overjoyed when he saw this, and the wishful staff hurriedly pulled back. In a flash, it hit the sword light that was piercing his chest and smashed it into pieces. Immediately, Xiaohua waved the wishful staff again and hit another sword light, which also turned into a firefly falling down. At this time, the flying sword seemed to be hesitating. Fight! Xiaohua saw an opportunity and did not dare to neglect it. His figure flew, and he did not dare to relax the spiritual power in his hand. The wishful staff hit the flying sword. Dang! There was another loud sound, and a light blue brilliance rippled on the flying sword. A huge force was born from the flying sword, and Xiaohua's figure was somewhat unstable. Of course, the flying sword was not as good as Xiaohua. It swayed rapidly, as if the flying sword that had left the innate jellyfish had lost its support. Roar! Inside the sword array, there was a louder dragon roar, and the soul of the little white dragon suddenly soared, and soon it was more than a few feet. The sword array of the little white dragon was also expanding. Oh! Xiaohua was surprised and was considering whether to withdraw his heaven and earth sleeve technique. Roar! The little white dragon seemed to know that this was his last chance to escape, and he was also desperate. A series of dragon roars were issued, and all of a sudden, it grew to a size of 10 feet, and the dragon's body was still growing. Pa! There was a soft sound, and in the sword array that the little white dragon had found a flaw, there was a crack between the two flying swords. This crack suddenly became the breakthrough point of the sword array's collapse, and the dragon head of the little white dragon suddenly came out of the sword array. Fight! Xiaohua was overjoyed, and the staff in his right hand was raised high again, and like a mountain, it hit the supreme light sword. In the face of the whistling wind above the wishful staff, the Tai Wei green light sword flashed a burst of sword light, and then the sword array that imprisoned the little white dragon disappeared, and the Tai Wei green light sword turned into a blue light, quickly rushed out of the rock pillar and disappeared into the hole. Good, Xiaohua breathed a long sigh of relief and turned to look at the little white dragon. Who would have thought that once the little white dragon escaped from the imprisonment of the sword array, it immediately shrank rapidly. Not only did it return to its previous snake-like appearance, its appearance became even dimmer. It was like the first light of dawn, faintly discernible. Little white, Xiaohua was shocked, and regardless of his injuries, he released his mind and put the little white dragon's soul into his space. However, suddenly Xiaohua thought of another thing, and he took back his mind, returned to the space, and called out Goldie. Chapter 24:17. Sure enough, the moment Goldie saw Whitey's soul, it immediately woke up. The yellow fur on its body suddenly stood up, and even its huge tail stood straight up. Xiaobai was also shocked. Roar, it struggled and swayed with difficulty. Sigh, Xiaohua didn't have time to say anything to Xiaohuang and hurriedly put it back into the space. Xiaohuang feeds on souls and cores. Xiaobai is also a soul. Naturally, we can't put them together. Xiaohua was in a difficult position, and in my space, I can't control it right now. What should I do? If I had a Dharma body before, I could try to send it in. Can the Buddha Saraira succeed? Xiaohua thought of his Buddha fire. Will the Buddha fire burn Xiaobai to death? Xiaohua hesitated again. Let's try it. However, when Xiaohua wrapped his mind around Xiaobai, there was another problem. His mind seemed to be completely unable to sense Xiaobai's soul. Oh, Xiaobai is a soul. It's not a tangible thing. My mind can't collect it. Right, don't I have soul strands? When Xiaohua saw that little white dragon's soul was about to dissipate, he didn't dare to think about it anymore. He quickly pulled out the soul thread from his heaven ring and wrapped it around little white dragon. Little white dragon, who was bound by the soul thread, panicked. It didn't understand what was happening and struggled with all its strength. Seeing little white struggle, Xiaohua originally didn't care about it. However, a strong force was transmitted from the soul strand, pulling his soul strand by a lot in an instant. Xiaohua didn't find it strange. The soul also has strength? However, Xiaohua couldn't communicate with Xiaobai. He could only tap his forehead and make some gestures with his hands. He didn't know if Xiaobai could understand. Moreover, Xiaohua released even more soul strands. Xiaobai didn't know if it saw Xiaohua's gestures or if it understood. It didn't have too many methods to struggle. After struggling for a while, it gave up and could only let Xiaohua ravage it. Xiaohua carefully pulled back the strand of soul force, but the strand of soul force was different from when he was using a soul armament. He could feel that Xiaobai's soul was extremely heavy, as if he was dragging a large object. See, Xiaohua somewhat understood. Dual cultivation techniques emphasize soul remembrance and soul power, but this technique of mine is half-baked and I didn't really focus on it, so I didn't really understand it before. Now, he knew that even though the soul was invisible to the naked eye and spiritual will, it was still an incorporeal being. However, to the soul strands, they were tangible objects. Although Whitey's soul had already dimmed and was on the verge of collapse, it still had weight to the soul strands. My soul strands. My own soul cultivation technique is only at the heaven-encompassing soul, which should be the beginning of soul cultivation. The soul power of my soul strands is also very weak. Or maybe my soul power is weak, so my soul strands don't have much strength. However, in any case, Xiaohua still had soul strands and had some soul power. As he moved bit by bit, little white dragon's soul actually passed through the magic eye imprint and slowly entered that mysterious place. Seeing Xiaohua's enormous mysterious dark cloud and the faint rumbling of thunder within the dark cloud, little white dragon was extremely alarmed. However, smelling the sweet smell of black silk wood in that mysterious place, little white dragon was a bit excited and opened its dragon mouth, opening and closing it. Oh! Seeing this, Xiaohua retracted his soul strands into the heaven-encompassing soul and took out the black silk wood. Little white dragon was happy and slowly swam around the black silk wood as if it was extremely enjoying it. So this black silk wood is not only useful for soul cultivation techniques, it's also useful for Whitey's soul. Xiao Hua thought to himself and then retracted the black silk wood back into the heaven-encompassing soul. Seeing the black silk would move into the dark cloud, Little White's soul also chased under the dark cloud, but seeing the enormous dark cloud, it was abnormally afraid. You come in too. Xiao Hua's soul strands reached out again and wrapped around Little White Dragon's soul. However, Little White Dragon was still afraid and used all its strength to struggle, as if the dark cloud was a dragon's pool and tiger's den. Once it entered, its life would be in danger. You come in. Xiao Hua was a bit anxious. His soul strands tightly wrapped around Little White, and Little White was indeed exhausted and didn't struggle anymore. In the end, it was pulled into the heaven-encompassing soul by Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua actually didn't know the danger of this action. Not only for Little White Dragon, but even for himself, it was also extremely inappropriate. The soul has always been a cultivator's vital point. Even if the body enters the cycle of reincarnation, the soul is also the last thing one can rely on. Xiao Hua actually allowed Little White Dragon's soul to enter his own soul. On one hand, Little White's life and death is already under his control. His soul can transform Little White's soul into his own soul with a thought. On the other hand, if Little White's soul is stronger than Xiao Hua's soul, it will inevitably cause harm to Xiao Hua's soul. Even if the two of them coexist peacefully, Xiao Hua's soul will still cause harm to Little White's soul. Xiao Hua was ignorant and didn't know. Although Little White knew, it was no match for Xiao Hua's fierceness and could only feel wronged. Since ancient times, there were no better people than this who did bad things with good intentions. However, fortunately, when Little White's soul arrived at the heaven of surrounding aura, the entire heaven of surrounding aura was filled with the rich black silk wood qi, and Xiao Hua's primordial spirit slowly swam inside, slowly emitting fluctuations. Little White Dragon immediately understood. Thank you. A timid, extremely tired and extremely small voice was transmitted to Xiao Hua's mind. Little White? Is that you? Xiao Hua was already familiar with Little White's voice transmission and replied very naturally. Little White? That voice was a little happy and a little confused. Damn, that's right. Xiao Hua was greatly embarrassed. Little White was just his own wishful thinking. Little White still didn't know. I'm called Little White. You? What's your name? I'm called Xiao Hua. I gave you the name Little White. If you don't like it, then forget it. What's your name? Xiao Hua said very apologetically. My name. At this point, Little White was a little heavy and seemed to be even more hesitant. Just call me Little White. Xiao Hua, must not devour. Little White. Don't worry, Little White, I won't. Xiao Hua simply didn't know what devouring was and immediately comforted it. You should first recuperate here. When your soul condenses, I will let you out. I'm tired. Little White's voice became even smaller. Thank you, Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was just about to reply when he saw Little White close its eyes. Its soul also slightly danced in the heaven ring of qi, and the surrounding black silkwood's aura also swarmed over. All right, let it recover. Xiao Hua's heart was greatly relieved and slowly retreated from the heaven ring of qi. At this time, within the stone pillar, there was already no dazzling blue brilliance, only rich innate true water. However, around Xiao Hua, there were still some gaps that the innate true water had not flooded. Of course, this gap was also slowly shrinking. Only now did Xiao Hua have the heart to look at the injury on his left arm. He saw that the place where the blue light lingered previously had already been devoured by the golden threads in Xiao Hua's blood. Not only did the blood not flow, the sword scar also showed signs of recovery. And body cultivators really have an advantage in healing injuries. Perhaps those beast cultivators chose to cultivate with spirit beasts because of their strong self-healing ability? Thinking about this, Xiao Hua took out the wishful staff and was about to rush out of the innate true water, preparing to leave through the hole in the stone pillar. However, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up when he saw the boundless primordial water. With a wave of his hand, he took out the mist pearl that Dui Miaoqing had given him. After that, he gave Dui Miaoqing's storage pouch a simple look and took out the jade slip for refining the mist pearl. Xiaohua immersed his divine sense in it and looked for a moment. He knew that the refining of the tide bead was similar to that of the blue water bead, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He did not need to completely refine the tide bead, he only needed to slightly control it. Immediately, Xiaohua did not delay. He urged his magic power and cast a few refining spells on it. In just a moment, the tide bead emitted a faint blue light again. Go, Xiaohua did not hesitate. He pointed his finger, and the misty tide pearl rushed into the Xiantian primordial water. Instantly, a tiny whirlpool appeared above the misty tide pearl, and the Xiantian primordial water poured into the misty tide pearl like a swarm of bees. Hee, Xiaohua laughed sinisterly. There was so much innate true water in the stone pillar. If he did not take it now, he did not know who would benefit from it in the future. After absorbing the innate true water, the tide bead's brilliance became more and more brilliant. It grew bigger and bigger until it was more than a foot long. The blue brilliance was dazzling, and there was a layer of blue halo around it. It was really hazy like the tide. However, at this time, the innate true water in the stone pillar's space had only decreased by 30%. The quality of this tide bead is also not good. Xiaohua smacked his lips. He was really regretful in his heart. Immediately, Xiaohua took out the magic tool that could hold liquid that Sun Shu gave him. That magic tool also contained snake venom, which was also very precious. Xiaohua had no choice but to put it into the space. Seeing that he did not have such a magic tool, Xiaohua looked at Dui Miaoqing's storage pouch. However, when Xiaohua was looking for the jade slips earlier, there were a few magic tools inside, but they did not look like they could hold liquid. Xiaohua could only look for the storage pouches left behind by Dui Hui and the others. Great! When Xiaohua took out a 1-foot-long cyan jade bottle from the storage pouch of a bald cultivator with great difficulty, he could not help but smile brilliantly. This jade bottle was thin and long, and there was a grain-sized gap at the mouth of the bottle. Moreover, there were some cracks on the body of the jade bottle. It was unknown whether the jade bottle itself was different or the jade bottle was damaged. However, when Xiaohua took out the jade slips from the cultivator's storage pouch, he was somewhat dumbstruck. This was because in addition to the jade slips, there were also a few golden leaves inside the storage pouch. They were exactly the same as the golden centipede that Kunlun Sek's Han Zhu gave him. Chapter 24:18. Could this cultivator be a Buddhist disciple? Xiaohua hadn't heard any news about the Buddhist sect for a long time. When he suddenly saw it here, he was shocked. That bastard Han Zhu gave me a small golden Buddha and told me to use my Buddhist sense to examine it when I'm in the late foundation establishment stage. He wants to take me to the ruins of the Buddhist sect. Damn, this young master is doing well in the Dao sect. Why would I go to the ruins of the Buddhist sect? Forget it, let's not talk about him. Let's see how to use this magic tool first. Xiaohua placed several golden puppets into the Buddha Saraira and looked through them one by one. When he saw one of the golden pages, he suddenly stopped. After waiting for another incense stick's worth of time, Xiaohua opened his eyes and put the golden puppets into his space. He glanced at the jade bottle and said with a smile, "So this is a Buddhist magic tool called the clear water bottle. It's said to be able to hold the water of 100 rivers. Come, let this young master see if this clear water bottle meets this young master's wishes." While speaking, Xiaohua took out the Buddha Saraira and saw a faint golden light sprinkle all over. Xiaohua then threw the clear water bottle in front of the Buddha Saraira. The Buddha Saraira put its palms together, one hand pointing to the sky and the other pointing to the ground. Its face was full of compassion. Lin, the Buddha Saraira lightly chanted and a Sanskrit incantation flew out and landed on the clear water bottle. Soon after, a hazy and indistinct figure flew out from the clear water bottle and landed in front of the Buddha Saraira. After slightly cupping its hands, it turned into a light smoke and disappeared. Soon after, Xiaohua's Buddhist sense was on the clear water bottle. According to the method described in the golden puppet, he refined the clear water bottle bit by bit. The refining method of this Buddhist magic tool seems to be somewhat similar to the island guarding token of Sunset Island. Xiaohua thought to himself when he saw the Buddhist light on the clear water bottle disappear in a flash. Behind the golden puppet, there were naturally many golden puppet records regarding the use of the clear water bottle. However, Xiaohua was impatient and didn't dare to stay any longer. He only wanted to see how to refine and activate the clear water bottle to collect true water. The method of controlling this Buddhist artifact is different from that of a magic artifact. It requires the use of Buddhist seals to drive psychokinesis. Xiaohua only cultivated the Buddha Saraira in a daze. How could he know what psychokinesis is? Helpless, Xiaohua tossed the water bottle into the air like a basic magic tool of the Tao sect. First, he habitually pointed at it with his hand as if he was urging his magic power. Then he suddenly realized something and hurriedly formed a Buddhist seal with his hand. The Buddhist seal was somewhat similar to a spell, so it wasn't too difficult for Xiaohua. However, the Buddhist seal was formed, but what about the power of thought? Who the hell knows where it is? However, the strange thing was that as the pure water bottle tilted slightly, a very gentle suction force was produced from the pure water bottle. It was even softer than the wind as it slowly floated towards the innate primordial water. Although the suction force was gentle, as soon as it came into contact with the innate primordial water, all the bubbles and other things were sucked into the pure water bottle. It was even more efficient than the tidal beads. The Buddha's heart is merciful and emphasizes on helping those who are fated. This Buddhist artifact is also the same. It doesn't have any smoke or fire. Although it's extremely gentle, it also can't be resisted. Xiaohua seemed to have understood something, but he was also extremely confused. But I didn't control this pure water bottle. How could this primordial water? Forget it, isn't it good to be able to collect it? Let's talk about it later. That Buddhist artifact pure water bottle was indeed powerful. In less than 2 hours, more than 90% of the innate primordial water in the stone pillar had been absorbed. Don't absorb anymore. Leave some for the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain. Xiaohua was grinning from ear to ear. This Buddhist artifact was really to his liking. Seeing that this several thousand feet wide area was empty, the remaining innate primordial water was divided into 2 parts and gathered on both sides of the stone pillar. It slowly turned into a light blue brilliance and seeped out of the stone pillar. Xiaohua hurriedly used his Buddhist consciousness to control the pure water bottle and collected it. Let's go! Xiaohua was perfectly satisfied. He clapped his hands and once again drilled out of the fist-sized hole. Ouch, however, Xiaohua was indeed a little too pleased with himself. When he flew out, he forgot to maintain his balance. In a moment of carelessness, he was sucked in by the powerful force outside the stone pillar. His body involuntarily flew towards the top of the spindle. Oh, forget it! Xiaohua just wanted to resist, but when he saw the cliff above the abyss, he laughed. Isn't it the same as going out? Let's go from here. This was practically the feeling of falling from the top of a waterfall. In the beginning, it was still somewhat slow, but as he fell and the water flow became stronger, his speed became faster and faster. However, at this moment, Xiaohua was sliding down from the middle of the stone pillar. This kind of feeling really gave Xiaohua a kind of illusion, a kind of strange feeling. Hong! A loud and clear sound rang out. Like 100 rivers returning to the sea, countless light blue rays of light rushed into the rock wall. Xiaohua, who had already used the earth escape technique, also entered the rock wall. Ouch, something's wrong. Just as Xiaohua's body sank into the rock wall, a wave of scorching heat rushed into Xiaohua's body from the rock wall. This heat not only attacked Xiaohua's meridians, but also rushed into his blood vessels and bones. Xiaohua's body could be said to have been tempered thousands of times. In an instant, it was somewhat difficult for him to endure. The primordial spirit inside the bone thread immediately increased the speed of the bone tempering technique. A faint orange brilliance slowly emerged. While resisting the scorching heat, it protected Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua's entire body was in endless pain. That scorching heat was simply like millions of black iron needles piercing into Xiaohua's body. It was as if Xiaohua was sent to the 9th heaven and was being baked under the sun. Even though Xiaohua had practiced the fire escape technique, Even though Xiaohua had been tempered by the origin of fire, this kind of yang qi between heaven and earth still made Xiaohua want to die. Xiaohua didn't know how much time had passed, and he didn't know how far he had been swept away by the torrent. Suddenly, Xiaohua felt a cool breeze coming from his feet. Although this cool breeze was faint, it was like a sweet rain from the 9 heavens. It made him feel like he had just escaped from prison. Great! I've finally endured it. Xiaohua was very happy. However, just as this joy was born, that cool breeze enveloped his entire body and actually turned into a powerful suction force. Where am I going? Xiaohua stared blankly. Very habitually, he swept out his divine sense and couldn't help but be shocked. He saw that he was still inside the rock wall, but about 10 zhang away from the rock wall, a huge red-skinned gourd was precisely aimed at him. That cool and suction force was emitted from the mouth of that gourd. You're courting death. Xiaohua was furious. He didn't have time to look elsewhere. With a flick of his right hand, the universe in the sleeve was used from his still intact Taoist robe. In an instant, that red-skinned gourd was covered, and without hesitation, he easily sucked it into his own space. Who? An extremely shocked voice came from above. Chapter 24:19. At this time, Xiaohua had rushed out of the rock wall. He was much faster than a flying sword as he rushed into the air. Of course it's this young master. Xiaohua's figure flipped a few times in the air. His divine sense swept through the entire space and he laughed loudly. This was an underground space that was several times larger than the space of the rock pillars. There was a faint brilliance on the surrounding rock walls. The place where Xiaohua had rushed out from was a place that looked like a spout. There were countless places like this in the entire space. 3 illusory swordsmen were standing around the mouth of the fountain. These illusory swordsmen were all baffled. Their faces were filled with disbelief. And how could a Tao sect disciple suddenly rush out of this place? Moreover, it was a foundation establishment disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Even their red-skinned gourd had suddenly disappeared. Xiaohua had a complacent smile on his face. His divine sense swept through these illusory swordsmen. However, when his gaze fell on the 7 corpses of Tao sect disciples lying crookedly around the spout, his face unconsciously turned cold. Fortunately, although 2 of these 7 Tao sect disciples were from the Xuanyan school, Xiao Mao was not among them. These illusory swordsmen were not bystanders. They were the illusory swordsmen who had come to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain after attacking the Xuanyan School's Spirit Stone Mine. Except for Liao Chenkong of the Flying Feather sect, whom Xiaohua had previously used his Buddhist consciousness to peek at in the Gale snowfield, he did not recognize the other 2. They were Zhong Haoshuan and Bai Jie of the Bright Sword sect. They had come to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain for no other reason than the Yinyang Sword Spirit that they had promised to the Black Phoenix Sword sect's LV Ruochang 5 years ago. Back then, Zhong Haoshuan had already gotten a clue about the 2 Yin and Yang Sword Spirits, and he had successfully nurtured the 2 Sword Spirits a year later. But these 2 Sword Spirits were too weak, and the Clear Sword sect didn't have 2 disciples with excellent physiques to nurture these 2 Sword Spirits. Thus, Zhong Haoshuan had set his sights on Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain. However, at that time, the Spirit Stone Mine formation had become more and more intense. Ling Yunwu and the others had died in an accident, causing the various sects to panic. Even the Clear Sword sect had their own missions and didn't dare to send extra people to Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain. Moreover, if they didn't have suitable sword cultivator disciples to nurture the sword spirits, they would need suitable blood essence. The Clear Sword sect wasn't willing to lose their own disciples, so they set their sights on the Tao sect disciples. Searching for these disciples took several years until recently, when Guan Peng invited the Clear Sword sect disciples to attack Xuanyan School's Spirit Stone Mine. One of Zhong Haoshuan's conditions was to find suitable disciples with suitable physiques to use as blood sacrifices. But what surprised Zhong Haoshuan was that the Yang Sword Spirit had already undergone the blood sacrifice, and the sword spirit within the sword gourd had clearly been nurtured, absorbing the yang qi underground. Suddenly, the sword gourd disappeared. Moreover, a Thunder Control sect disciple had inexplicably rushed out. How could he not fly into a rage? Kill! What else did Zhong Haoshuan need to say? If Xiaohua hadn't appeared, he really wouldn't have known the whereabouts of the sword gourd. But Xiaohua had already flown out. Even if his Taoist robe was somewhat shabby, with one sleeve missing and revealing his bare arms, who could say that a sleeveless hand couldn't conveniently steal melons? But following Zhong Haoshuan's furious roar, a flying sword that was like a scorching sun flew out from under his feet. This scorching sun sword was exceptionally ferocious within this yang qi, illuminating the entire space. A whistling sword wind, a trace of sword light that could pierce into Xiaohua's body, and a kind of earth-shattering confinement force that tightly suppressed Xiaohua's body in midair, all came from that scorching sun. Zhong Haoshuan's first move was the scorching sun sword. He didn't want to repeat Ling Yunwu's mistakes, even though he didn't know who killed Ling Yunwu. Ouch! Seeing such a powerful flying sword, Xiaohua's face turned pale with fright. He hurriedly urged his flying technique with all his might, wanting to escape from the confinement of the scorching sun sword. However, no matter how he urged his magic power, he could only fly about a foot away from the sword intent, and was immediately enveloped by the scorching sun sword. Seeing that Xiaohua actually had magic power to struggle, Zhong Haoshuan's face revealed a trace of a smile. He was only an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, so what if he could struggle? If he couldn't struggle, Zhong Haoshuan would be a little surprised. The scorching sun sword was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it pierced Xiaohua's chest. Seeing that the brilliance in the air was converging in one place and was about to sink into Xiaohua's chest, Zhong Haoshuan's face finally relaxed a little. At this moment, Xiaohua suddenly waved his hand, and a 2-foot-long wishful staff appeared. His figure flashed and hit the scorching sun sword with incomparable speed. The huge force on the sword light caused Xiaohua's figure to stagger, and he really flew to Liao Qinkong's side. Liao Qinkong's face showed a trace of surprise, but his hands were still tucked in the sword armor, and he looked indifferent. Xiaohua's back was facing Liao Qinkong. When he was about 2 feet away, he suddenly turned around and raised his wishful staff. With a loud shout, he hit Liao Qinkong's forehead. Seeing that Xiaohua's wishful staff was stirring up the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, Liao Qinkong laughed. At the same time, his feet leaped, and his figure flew into the air. He laughed and said, "I was waiting for you to launch a sneak attack. I didn't expect you to really come." It turned out that Liao Qinkong had already seen through Xiaohua's sneak attack plan. Oh, not good. When Xiaohua saw Liao Qinkong fly out, his arms were exposed from the sword armor. His silver-white arms were obviously different from those of other sword cultivators. He couldn't help but turn pale with fright. His figure wanted to escape and attack another disciple of the Clear Sword sect. "Since you want to attack this old man, don't leave." Liao Qinkong smiled proudly, and a huge fist rushed towards Xiaohua. Seeing that Liao Qinkong was only a few feet away from Xiaohua, and that the fist was also close to Xiaohua, Xiaohua suddenly laughed. "This young master also doesn't plan to leave?" As he spoke, the somewhat crooked wishful staff suddenly became thick, and with a sound, it smashed towards Liao Qinkong's arm. Seeing Xiaohua's smile, Liao Qinkong also sneered. The wishful staff gave him a feeling of surging wind and clouds, but he believed in his fist more. Besides, the scorching sun sword was already behind Xiaohua. As long as he blocked Xiaohua's staff, the scorching sun sword would be able to pierce Xiaohua's back. Dang! With a loud sound, a heart-wrenching pain came from his fist. It was a pain that he had never experienced since he mastered the technique. After the pain, his arm was numb, and he couldn't feel anything at all. This numbness not only numbed his arm, but also his whole body in an instant. Looking at Xiaohua again, he slightly waved the wishful staff in his hand. The head of the staff that hit Liao Qinkong's fist immediately turned into the tail of the staff. The tail of the staff became the head of the staff, and it smashed towards Liao Qinkong's forehead like a bolt of lightning. "Liao Jianyu dodge!" Zhong Haoshuan shouted in the distance. Run! This shout really woke Liao Qinkong up. Sword light flashed on his body, and his figure quickly escaped. Haha, do you think you can escape? Xiaohua's figure was even faster. In just a flash, he stuck to Liao Qinkong's body, and the wishful staff hit Liao Qinkong's forehead with a poof sound. Needless to say, Liao Qinkong's fist was shattered by the wishful staff. As for his forehead, there was no need to mention it. Hiss! Zhong Haoshuan sucked in a breath of cold air. His eyes were wide open as he watched Liao Qinkong's headless corpse fall. He was shocked. Feng Du, what is your relationship with Feng Buping? Are you out of your mind? Xiaohua's figure spread out. He didn't avoid the scorching sun sword at all. Instead, he flew a few feet closer. The wishful staff in his hand once again struck out like a thunderbolt. With a crisp sound, the brilliance of the scorching sun sword splashed in all directions. Bai Jia, come and help me. Zhong Haoshuan was shocked. He really didn't expect it to be a blow that didn't move forward. Moreover, the power of the wishful staff was actually something that the scorching sun sword couldn't resist. Bai Jia was a grade 1 illusory swordsman. Seeing that Liao Qinkong was easily killed by Xiaohua and that Zhong Haoshuan's flying sword was also damaged in the blink of an eye, his heart was already trembling with fear. When he heard Zhong Haoshuan calling for him, he immediately urged the flying sword under his feet to rush over. Chi-la-la! A lightning-like flying sword flew out from Bai Jia's feet and attacked Xiaohua. Ha! Xiaohua laughed. If it was any other flying sword, Xiaohua would still have to think for a moment, but this was the lightning sword, so he didn't have any burden at all. Attack! Xiaohua's left hand pulled the wishful staff. While attacking Zhong Haoshuan, his right hand was empty, and he urged his spiritual power to cast the thunder palm. Moreover, what was even more insidious was that after the thunder palm, Xiaohua's spiritual power didn't stop at all. He urged it again, and the heaven and earth sleeve technique came out one after another. Kacha! A lightning much thicker than the lightning sword emerged from Xiaohua's hand and blocked the lightning sword. Ah, you? You are the terrifying phoenix of the Imperial Thunder Sect? Seeing the thick lightning, Bai Jia suddenly thought of something and was extremely horrified. Terrifying phoenix? His voice didn't matter, but Zhong Haoshuan was also shocked. After all, his thoughts were the same as Feng Buping's. The reputation of this terrifying phoenix was really quite resounding. It didn't matter if Zhong Haoshuan was shocked, but Bai Jia was dumbfounded. Just as he roared out, he felt a shackling force that he was almost unable to resist enveloping him. He lost his head out of fear, disregarding the thunder light sword that was blocked by Xiaohua's thunder palm, and tried his best to break free. In fact, he was a first-grade illusory swordsman. Xiaohua's heaven and earth sleeve could certainly imprison him. As long as he used the lightning sword, he could also break this imprisonment force. However, when he struggled, the sword spirit in his mouth spurted out. It was not easy to break free from the heaven and earth sleeve. Moreover, when he just broke free from the imprisonment force, he suddenly felt a tingling pain in his Naiwan palace. The sword spirit was also not flowing smoothly. His figure stagnated and fell from midair. However, this was not the worst-case scenario. Just when he wanted to resist, the most frightening thing happened. A stronger wind than the imprisonment force just now pressed down from the top of his head. The wind was full of killing intent and sharpness. Chapter 24:20. Ah! Bai Jia was shocked. Just as he raised his head slightly, he saw that Xiaohua's staff, which was originally aimed at Zhong Haoshuan, was now only 3 feet away from his head. The 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel was an ancient weapon that did not belong to the 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel. Although Xiaohua's Wishful Heaven Cudgel was far less powerful than the 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel, he was facing a grade 1 illusory swordsman like Bai Jia. Moreover, under a series of calculations such as the world in the sleeve and soul stab, the distance of 3 feet was covered in a flash. Bai Jia screamed as the Wishful Heaven Cudgel hit his forehead. With the same muffled sound, Bai Jia's head was broken like a gourd. Ha! Xiaohua laughed. His figure did not stop at all. He turned his head and used wind escape to force Zhong Haoshuan. Hiss, Zhong Haoshuan took a breath, his eyes narrowed tightly. He gritted his teeth, and his whole body flashed with a strong brilliance, like a hedgehog with a long brilliance. Terrifying Phoenix, this old man did not expect to meet you here. Since you have appeared, Ling Yunwu and the others must have died. They can't keep you, then let this old man keep you. Zhong Haoshuan enunciated each word clearly. The scorching sun sword also suddenly released a sword beam that soared into the sky. Zhong Haoshuan opened his mouth and spat out his sword essence. It fell into the scorching sun sword, and Zhong Haoshuan's figure flashed extremely quickly, transforming into a flying sword. Kill! Zhong Haoshuan said the last word of his life. His entire body landed on the flying sword. The brilliance of the flying sword that was already soaring into the sky became even more dazzling. It was truly like a rising sun. Moreover, a tragic feeling of mutual destruction blossomed from the sun. That blossoming death aura was like the rain lotus that Xiaohua saw on the ice lake that day. It was extremely dazzling, and it blossomed petal by petal. Ha! Xiaohua laughed. With a wave of his hands, Zhong Haoshuan, who had turned into a sword, suddenly felt a burning sensation all around him. Samadhi true fire. Zhong Haoshuan's gradually blurred consciousness was shocked, but he saw a circle of pure purple Samadhi true fire burning around the scorching sun flying sword. In fact, the surrounding masculine energy was also ignited, and more fireballs than Zhong Haoshuan formed around him. Break, Zhong Haoshuan's heart was like dead ashes. He absolutely didn't expect Xiaohua to actually know the true Samadhi fire. He absolutely didn't expect Xiaohua to have such an exquisite fire control technique. He also absolutely didn't expect Xiaohua to add fuel to the fire at this time, drawing out the secret technique he originally wanted to activate ahead of time. Boom! With a loud sound, the entire space shook. Sword light overflowed in all directions, and sparks shot in all directions. However, this explosion wasn't aimed at Xiaohua. It only exploded on the spot. The damage it dealt to Xiaohua, Sai, could be ignored. When the flame gradually disappeared, Xiaohua flew over from an extremely far place. The instant of the explosion was enough for Xiaohua to fly extremely far away. Alas! Xiaohua looked at the mess on the ground, shook his head and said, "It's really a pity, an illusory swordsman transformed into a flying sword." Then, Xiaohua landed on the ground and looked at the 7 Dao sect disciples who were killed earlier. Their corpses had been scattered by Zhong Haoshuan's explosion, but by Jie and Liao Qinkong's corpses were still intact. Xiaohua reached out and took the two people's storage bags. After searching for a moment, he found a sword bamboo slip. He immersed his divine sense in it for a moment, and sneered, "They deserve to die. They actually sacrificed the lives of my Dao sect disciples to the sword spirit. This kind of sword spirit is also extremely tyrannical. How can it be used? I'm afraid the Dao of the sword has been defeated again, right? However, I still want to go and see whether Xiao Mao is still alive in this world. Even if he's dead, I will avenge him." Xiaohua laughed sinisterly. His figure flew up using the wind escape technique, and rushed out quickly along the route drawn in the sword bamboo slip. This was an underground space that was thousands of feet in size, similar to the space where Zhong Haoshuan and the others sacrificed the red-skinned gourd sword spirit. However, the scene within was completely different. On the top of the rock wall that was tens of thousands of feet tall, countless six-petal crystals were connected to each other. Faint blue light faintly flowed over them. As this light flickered between the 6 petals of the crystal, an incomparably cold aura was emitted. The threads of aura passed through the crystal and disappeared into the rock wall. Not a trace of it could be seen. Moreover, between these countless 6-petaled crystals, there were circular crystal pillars that were a few feet or 10 feet in size. They were directly inserted into the rock wall, and their whereabouts were unknown. Looking at the entire space, the faint blue light was like a gem that was constantly blooming, filling the entire space. This blue light was extremely cold, and there were fine rays of light that were born from all over the space. These fine rays of light did not fall to the ground, but instead rushed into the rock wall at the top of the space with the brilliance, and turned into little crystals. The extremely cold, faint blue light came from under the space, from the sharp tips of the rock spikes that rose from the ground. These rock spikes were extremely similar to the stone bells that were usually hung upside down in caves. They were milky white in color, and on the sharp rock spikes, thumb-sized fluorescent lights flashed brightly, similar to the stone stalactites that dripped from the top of the stone bells. However, when the stone stalactites dripped to the ground, the thumb-sized fluorescent light blue light pierced into the air, spreading throughout the entire space. In a corner of this strange and cold space, a green-skinned bottle gourd was faintly emitting a green-blue light. It was even vibrating rhythmically. The mouth of the gourd was facing down, facing a huge rock spike. A faint blue light that could be seen with the naked eye covered the tip of the rock spike, and the blue light from the fluorescent lights mixed into the green light and was absorbed by the green gourd. Looking at the surroundings of the huge rock spike, there were 7 Dao sect cultivators lying on the ground. 5 of them had already died. The faces of these 5 corpses were all bruised, and their faces were twisted with pain. This ferocious expression was frozen on their faces, as if their bodies had been frozen by some kind of coldness. Beside the 5 corpses, there were still 2 cultivators. One was a white-haired female cultivator, and the other was Xiao Mao, whose face was slightly weathered, and whose eyes were filled with viciousness. The 2 of them sat cross-legged on the ground. Their bodies flickered with a faint protective light. On the surface of the protective light, there was a thin layer of icy blue. Within the icy blue, crystalline light could be vaguely seen. If it weren't for this protective light, Xiao Mao and the female cultivator would have been frozen into popsicles like the corpses of the other 5 cultivators. However, Xiao Mao and the female cultivator couldn't move at all. Within the cold blue, there were several sword lights that moved like poisonous snakes and firmly restrained the 2 of them. Above Xiao Mao's head, next to the green gourd, stood 3 sword cultivators. One of them was someone Xiao Hua had seen on the Gale Snow Plains. It was the bird cultivator from the Quilted Mountain sect, Yu Ming, who had appeared with Feng Buping. The other 2 were the female cultivators of the Clear Sword sect, Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing. At this time, Yu Ming was standing high up with his hands crossed. There was no light around him to resist the extreme cold. There was a hint of arrogance in his eyes as he coldly looked at the actions of the 2 female cultivators who were only grade 1 illusory sword cultivators. Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing both had their eyes closed. Their sword robes were a bit messy at this time, and their exposed skin showed a green luster. This luster reflected the white hair on their heads, giving them a different kind of charm. However, the expressions on their faces were not relaxed at all. The corners of their eyes twitched slightly as if they were suppressing something. The 2 of them each stood on a flying sword. One of the sword lights was snow green, while the other was sky blue. The sword lights flashed and rushed into their bodies from time to time. Every time the sword lights flashed, their expressions became a bit better. At this time, the green gourd suddenly swelled. Not only did it emit a bright light, but an inexplicable fluctuation also spread out. Junior Sister Feng, it's time. Let's prepare for the 6th blood sacrifice. Zhong Mingtian's face showed a kind of excitement. He suddenly opened his eyes and said to Feng Qing. Feng Qing also showed a touch of blush on her face. She nodded and said, I will listen to Senior Sister's orders. Senior Yu. Zhong Mingtian raised his head and bowed to Yu Ming and said, Senior, please protect us. His tone was unusually respectful. He was not rude because Yu Ming was only grade 2 illusory sword cultivator. I know. You all can cast the spell. Yu Ming nodded proudly. Yes. Zhong Mingtian clapped his hand and a blood-red talisman appeared in his hand. This talisman was very strange. It did not look like a yellow talisman. It was shaped like a skeleton, but it was the size of a palm. The talisman on it was also strange. It faintly emitted a dark green light, and it was somewhat similar to the green seal script. Go, Zhong Mingtian threw the talisman into the air and formed a sword seal with his hand. A snow-green sword light flashed under his feet and a snowflake-like brilliance landed on the talisman. With a "see" sound, the brilliance actually ignited the talisman. The dark green flame burned the talisman into a ball of fire the size of a wicker basket. The talisman symbols in the ball of fire spun rapidly and a burst of ghostly wails and howls could be heard from the ball of fire. Junior sister Feng, Zhong Mingtan, saw the ball of fire rising and said anxiously, "The soul talisman has been activated. Quickly capture the Taoist sect cultivators." On the other side, Feng Qing was already prepared. With a grab of her hand, the white-haired female cultivator was sent flying into the air. She couldn't move at all. Kill. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Feng Qing's eyes. The flying sword under her feet suddenly flew out and turned into a foot-long ice needle. It quickly pierced into the female cultivator's forehead. The flying sword was abnormally sharp. It sank into the female cultivator's forehead the moment it touched it. A drop of dirty blood flowed out from the wound on her forehead. "Quick, senior sister Zhong," Feng Qing quickly formed a sword seal. Suddenly, the flying sword on the female cultivator's forehead turned into a sword light and retreated. Quick, Zhong Mingtian was also fast. He pointed with his finger and the ball of fire also rushed toward the blood on the female cultivator's forehead at an extremely fast speed. It rushed into the female cultivator's forehead before Feng Qing's flying sword left and the arrow of blood spurted out. Chapter 24-21. Hu, seeing the dark green fireball enter the female cultivator's forehead, the female cultivator's face immediately showed extreme pain. Her facial features were all twisted, and even a dark green color appeared. Feng Qing's eyes flashed with lingering fear, followed by a flash of red. She knew in her heart that the soul talisman was refining the female cultivator's soul in her mind. That kind of pain was definitely not something a living person could experience. Once her soul was extracted by the soul talisman, this female cultivator's life would come to an end. There would be no reincarnation, no future. Suddenly, the female cultivator stretched out her 4 limbs, and a great power was born from her body. The sword light that was binding her broke apart inch by inch, and the light blue brilliance also turned into fluorescent light that scattered in all directions. "Senior Yu." Seeing this, Zhong Mingtian's face was shocked, but his eyes flashed with joy. He knew that this was because the soul talisman had stimulated the female cultivator's in-water attribute potential at the end of the refinement process. This potential was exactly what was needed to refine the green gourd's sword spirit. Yuming didn't care at all. His arms suddenly shook, and 2 10-feet-long wings grew out from his back. That pale blue light mixed with white fluorescent light came from the feathers of his wings. Caw! Yuming's voice turned into a bird's cry. His wings also flapped a few times, and that light flew out from between his wings. The light flew in the air like thorns, and the pale blue light became more and more intense. When it flew in front of the female cultivator who was violently twisting her 4 limbs, it had become an inch-long thorn. Poo-pew! Almost at the same time, all the thorns pierced into the female cultivator's body at the same time. The female cultivator immediately became still, as if she was frozen in midair. "Junior Feng." Zhong Mingtian ordered again. Feng Qing's flying sword once again shot out an ice thorn, and this time it directly pierced into the female cultivator's heart. "Rise." Zhong Mingtian's face became serious. He formed a sword sign, and that dark green fireball actually came out of the female cultivator's head. At this time, the fireball was a kind of blood red, and its shape was constantly changing. The female cultivator's soul inside seemed to be tearing and trying to escape. "Go!" Zhong Mingtian pointed his finger, and his body also slowly flew. That fireball obediently rushed toward the green calabash that was constantly vibrating. Seeing that the fireball was about to be sucked into the green-skinned gourd, Zhong Mingtian's face showed a trace of relief. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. He heard a slight poof from the fireball, like a bubble bursting, and a blood-red shadow came out from the fireball. "Senior Yu, help me." Zhong Mingtian's face was shocked, and a red flush rushed to his eyes, and he hurriedly shouted, Yu Ming was already prepared. Just as Zhong Mingtian shouted, he flapped his wings and flew close to the green calabash. The blue and white light between his wings suddenly extended, and it pierced toward the blood-red shadow that came out of the fireball. A heart-wrenching scream sounded. The blood-red shadow was confined to the edge of the fireball by the blue light, and it couldn't fly out. At this time, the green calabash's suction force was generated, and the fireball and the blood-red shadow were both sucked in. The blood-red shadow's scream became longer and longer, as if it was falling into a bottomless abyss. The green calabash suddenly became still again, and it no longer vibrated. The fluctuations also disappeared, but the suction force from the calabash increased greatly, and a large amount of light blue light rushed into it. "Thank you, Senior Yu." Zhong Mingtian's panic had not disappeared, and he bowed to salute. It's no problem. You are only at the first grade of the illusory sword realm, and the blood sacrifice is a little difficult for these cultivators. Anyway, there is still this last one. Rest a little more." Yu Ming nodded slightly, turned around, and flew up again. "Yes, I understand." Zhong Mingtian smiled bitterly, and looked at Feng Qing. The two returned to their original position and closed their eyes to rest. Zhong Mingtian didn't want to do this, but at this time, the sword cultivators were fighting fiercely with the Dao sect, and there weren't many disciples who could be transferred. Moreover, the flying swords that they practiced were of the cold attribute, and there were even fewer of them. It would be best if there was a second-grade illusory sword realm disciple here, but there was no other way. They could only rely on her and Feng Qing now. However, fortunately, there was Senior Yu Ming here, whose cultivation was unfathomable. Although he looked like he was only at the second grade of the illusory sword realm, she had been warned by Zhong Haoshuan that this person was a bird cultivator with a background, and his strength was far from what she could detect. Senior Zhong and the others should be here by now, right? Zhong Mingtian knew that the two of them were a little stretched. The blood sacrifice took too long, and Zhong Haoshuan and the others must have finished much faster. They should have finished by now. They should be on their way here. Another hour passed, and there were no signs of Zhong Haoshuan and the others. The green skin gourd began to vibrate for the last time. Seeing the green skin gourd's light ripple, Zhong Mingtian opened her eyes with a bitter smile. Her sword companions were still abundant, but the soul talisman didn't rely solely on her sword companions. There was also a secret technique of the clear sword sect. She had used this secret technique 6 times today, and even she herself felt a little tired in the depths of her soul. It was as if she had gone through several cycles of reincarnation, and her soul was almost unable to move. This is the last time, Zhong Mingtian thought to herself. She gritted her teeth, looked at Feng Qing, and said with a smile, "Junior Feng, this is the last time. We will be able to complete the task immediately." Yes, it's all thanks to senior sister's strength. Feng Qing was also a little happy. She knew that this time, she had done a great service, and the clear sword sect would definitely reward her greatly. After Zhong Mingtian bowed to Yu Ming frowned and said, "Little friend Zhong, do you want to rest for a while more?" "I won't hide it from Senior Yu." Zhong Mingtian didn't hide it. Resting for a while more is no different from resting for half a day, unless this junior can rest for 7 days. Yu Ming nodded, then looked at a small hole in the distance and said curiously, "Zhong Haoshuan and the others should be here by now. Perhaps Senior Zhong is waiting for us to meet up." Feng Qing smiled. After all, this place isn't suitable for the 3 senior brothers flying swords. And perhaps, Yu Ming had a subtle feeling in his heart. Then, Zhong Mingtian took out the soul talisman again. When the soul talisman fireball appeared, Zhong Mingtian's body shook slightly, and even a layer of bruise flashed across his face. "Junior Feng," Zhong Mingtian shouted, and Feng Qing understood. She grabbed her hand, and Xiao Mao's body was lifted into the air. Just as Feng Qing was about to activate the flying sword under her feet, she suddenly heard Yu Ming shout, "Who is it?" Feng Qing was stunned and turned to look at Yu Ming. She saw that Yu Ming's eyes were looking at the hole, and there was a strange expression in his eyes. However, when Feng Qing looked at the hole again, it was still calm, and there was no movement at all. At this moment, Xiao Mao, who had been listless all this time, suddenly flashed with a violent brilliance, and the sword light that was binding him also broke inch by inch. Yu Ming snorted coldly, and with a sway of his body, he appeared in front of Xiao Mao. His wings flapped, and countless rays of light shot out and surrounded Xiao Mao. The force of the rays of light trapped Xiao Mao, and no matter how Xiao Mao struggled, it was useless. Junior Feng, Zhong Mingtian's roar had a trace of anger in it. Yes, Feng Qing didn't dare to be distracted, and with a shake of her feet, a slender flying sword that looked like an icicle appeared, and it directly pierced between Xiao Mao's angry eyes. However, just as the flying sword was about to pierce through, something strange happened. A strong force of imprisonment descended from the sky, and in an instant, the flying sword was frozen in place. "Who are you?" Feng Qing was puzzled, and she wanted to activate the sword again, but she heard Yu Ming angrily looking at her back from afar. Feng Qing was shocked, and her body involuntarily flew away, and at the same time, she looked around. This glance didn't matter, but she saw a young cultivator in the robes of the Imperial Thunder sect, who appeared less than 10 feet behind her. His slender eyes were slanted upward, and an indescribable murderous aura was emitted from his eyes. Moreover, just as Feng Qing turned her head, that cultivator rubbed his hands together, and a thick lightning bolt appeared out of nowhere, and struck her forehead. Suddenly, a rumor uncontrollably grew in her mind. Terror Phoenix? Yes, the 3 characteristics of the Terror Phoenix. The first was its huge phoenix celestial body, the second was its slanted phoenix eyes, and the third was its proficiency in controlling lightning. This was something she had never seen before in the other Imperial Thunder sect disciples. Now, although the Imperial Thunder sect cultivator in front of her didn't show his phoenix celestial body, Feng Qing still shouted with lingering fear. "Terror Phoenix?" Yu Ming was also shocked, and immediately thought of Ling Yunwu, but Xiao Hua ignored him, as if he didn't know Xiao Mao, and didn't want to look at Xiao Mao. The thunder palm, which was several times thicker than an ordinary cultivator's, struck one toward Feng Qing and the other toward Zhong Mingtian. Poor Zhong Mingtian, who was trying her best to support the soul talisman, saw the huge lightning bolt coming and hurriedly wanted to activate the flying sword to meet the enemy, but the incomparable exhaustion in her soul rushed to her heart, and the smooth sword essence became sluggish, and the sky blue sword light that flew out like a snow bamboo slowed down a little. With just this slight delay, the lightning bolt hit her, and this was the result of Zhong Mingtian's dodging, and the thunder palm only hit her back. But what was the difference between hitting the back and hitting the forehead? The sky blue sword light around Zhong Mingtian flashed, and was immediately annihilated, and a bloody hole the size of a bowl appeared on her back. Zhong Mingtian screamed and fell from midair. She fell from midair, but the soul talisman's fireball went out of control again. It suddenly swelled up and even let out a strange sound like a ghost wailing and a wolf howling. That sound resounded in the entire space, and it was probably the souls of many people. "Run!" Seeing Zhong Mingtian die in just one move, Feng Qing was even more frightened, and the flying sword suddenly flew out, turning into thousands of ice spikes, and rushed toward Xiao Hua's thunder palm. Unfortunately, although these ice spikes were powerful, Xiao Hua's thunder palm was even more turbulent, and that lightning bolt poured down like a waterfall, and the thousands of ice spikes were like little grass in the water, floating. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.